Hey guys, tonight we're peeling back the heavy wooden doors of medieval convents and slipping quietly inside, past the stained glass windows and incense-scented halls. You've heard the sanitized version: quiet prayer, eternal chastity, maybe a little Gregorian chanting to spice things up. But I've got bad news. If you were a young woman in the Middle Ages, you probably wouldn't survive this story. This isn't some cozy little tale about spiritual enlightenment and sisterly support. No, tonight we're diving headfirst into a world where divine devotion collided with forced vows, backroom politics, bizarre mysticism, and enough buried scandal to make a bishop blush. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not your nun mom, I won't guilt you into it. Also, what time is it where you are, and where are you tuning in from? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing where my insomniac weirdos are hiding out. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the stone hallway of a convent. It's colder than you expect, and not in a charming monastery retreat kind of way. The air smells faintly of old wood, beeswax, and something else. Faint mildew, maybe. These walls have seen centuries of secrets. Every heavy footstep on the worn flagstone echoes like a whispered confession. You're 13, maybe 14, and you've just been left here by your father and a very quiet priest. He kissed your forehead, said something about God's will, and got back in the cart. You don't know it yet, but you're not alone. Dozens of girls like you are tucked behind these walls. Some were born to it, second daughters of noble houses, offered to God because there wasn't enough land or wealth to go around. Others, political pawns, disgraced daughters. A few actually chose this life, but they're the rare ones. The convent is called Santa Maria Extremeña, and it's got thick walls, high windows, and an eerie silence broken only by the soft shuffle of sandals and the low drone of matins. On the surface, it's a place of holy devotion, but scratch a little deeper and you find something else. First, let's talk about the architecture. It's all designed to keep the outside out and the inside in. Iron locks on the doors, wooden grills between the chapel and the main hall so the sisters can't be seen or see too much themselves. You're not allowed to leave without permission, and trust me, no one's giving it. There's a little irony though. These places, built to shelter women from the dangers of the world, were often far more dangerous on the inside. Not physically, not always, but emotionally, spiritually. It's the slow, creeping kind of suffocation. You learn early to keep secrets, to keep your voice down, to avoid Sister Margareta when she's fasting and hallucinating again. But what did daily life actually look like in here? Not the fantasy, the real thing. Your day starts long before dawn, with a bell so loud it feels like it was forged in hell for exactly this purpose. You wake up cold, always cold. You kneel, you chant, you pretend you didn't just dream about the boy who used to sell apples in the square. He had freckles and nice hands. After prayers, it's silence. Breakfast is mostly watery porridge, unless you're rich. Some sisters get care packages from noble families. Cheese, preserved fruits, maybe a slab of salt pork. You try not to look. Jealousy is a sin. Then chores, laundry, herb gardening, candle making, copying scripture. Hours and hours of it. If you're lucky, you're in the scriptorium, huddled over a desk, inking Latin phrases so carefully it makes your eyes water. If you're unlucky, it's pigsty duty or cleaning out the privy trench with a cracked bucket. Let's not romanticize this. You're not singing Disney songs with bluebirds and anthropomorphic brooms. You're exhausted. And if you're one of the sisters sent here for discipline, you're also being watched closely. Nuns who disobey don't get a slap on the wrist. They get solitary prayer, bread and water for a week, sometimes worse. Here's a fun fact. Some convents locked disobedient nuns in cells for weeks at a time, with a window just large enough to pass through food. And yes, in case you were wondering, this practice was seen as merciful. Medieval mercy is a whole thing. Now, despite the rules, despite the thick walls and iron bars, the outside world has a way of slipping in. A merchant's son passes through with deliveries. A young priest with soft eyes offers confession. You're told to ignore them. You don't. And here's our historical fact of the night. In 14th century England, some convents had to put up actual warning signs outside, instructing laymen to stop trying to flirt with the nuns. Imagine needing to legally prohibit medieval dudes from hitting on cloistered virgins. Some things never change, but not everything was unwanted attention. Let's be real. For some sisters, the convent was a refuge, a place to study, read, write, avoid marriage and childbirth. Some even rose to positions of serious authority, but for most, it was a trap disguised as salvation. Now here's your quirky fact. In several French and German convents, nuns kept pet squirrels. Not cats, not birds, squirrels. They fed them, named them, and in at least one weird case, buried them with tiny headstones. Because why not? And the debate of the night. Scholars still argue over whether the majority of nuns really felt called to religious life, or were just making the best of a bad hand. Diaries, letters, and secret records hint at deep dissatisfaction, even open resentment. But we'll never know how much was hidden beneath the veil. As you lay on your straw mattress, blanket pulled up to your chin, you listen to the creak of the convent at night. Somewhere, someone's coughing. Somewhere else, a novice is crying quietly. You don't blame her. Tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all again. But just wait. This place isn't as silent as it seems. You were told this was a place of peace, a haven of reflection and prayer. But no one mentioned how many girls here didn't choose this life. That word, vocation, it sounds noble, divine, purposeful. But in this convent, vocation often means, my father had too many daughters and not enough land, or my family owed the church a favour, or worse still, I said the wrong thing to the wrong man. You're not alone, the girl in the next bed over. She's 16, sharp-tongued and used to silk. Her name was Lady Agnès until last spring. Her older brother died in a jousting match, and suddenly the inheritance laws weren't in her favour anymore. With no marriage prospects left and no reason to keep feeding her, her family dropped her off at the convent like an unwanted heirloom. She spent her days copying psalms with a kind of vengeance that dents the parchment. You overhear things, whispers between novices about what they used to have, the dresses, the dances, the flirtations. One girl, Maria, says she was in love with a stable boy. He smelled like horses and rain, she sighs wistfully. The older nuns tell her to bite her tongue, to give those thoughts to God, but they don't erase so easily. In theory, every girl here took vows freely. Poverty, chastity, obedience, the holy trifecta. But let's be honest, how free is a choice when it's that or starvation, or being married off to some aging baron with 5 kids and gout? You recite the prayers anyway. You don't want to stand out. Now, let's be fair. There were some who truly believed. Devout young women who saw this as their calling, who fasted for days and claimed to see angels in their dreams. But for every ecstatic vision, there's a girl dreaming of escape, or at least of a better mattress. Daily life is relentless in its sameness. Wake, pray, eat, work, pray, sleep, repeat. It's spiritual Groundhog Day. The silence between prayers is supposed to bring you closer to God, but more often than not, it brings you face to face with your own boredom, your regrets, and occasionally your imagination. There's Sister Helena, an older nun with a hawk nose and suspiciously well-maintained hair. She keeps a stash of figs under her bed, clearly not part of the communal rationing system. And then there's Sister Beatrix, always scribbling in the margins of her book of hours. Little drawings of birds, or men, naked men. Not very realistic, but definitely enthusiastic. You're starting to notice a pattern. The longer a woman's been here, the more likely she is to find creative outlets. Some take up embroidery and stitch elaborate defiant saints with swords and fire halos. Others collect feathers or bits of polished glass from the garden, hoarding them like secret treasures. One nun, Sister Lucia, spends hours arranging pebbles into elaborate spirals. When asked why, she says, "To keep the devil guessing." Now here's your historical fact. In 13th century Italy, many noble families viewed convents as financial shortcuts. Rather than paying a hefty dowry to marry off a daughter, they'd send her to a convent for a smaller entry donation. It was like a spiritual clearance sale. And that brings us to a truly strange bit of convent economics. These entry fees, they created a class divide within the convent. Wealthier nuns often had private cells, better food, even personal books and finer habits. Poorer ones, shared rooms, rougher wool, no access to fancy scrolls. So much for all are equal before God. You're learning to read between the prayers now. The Abbey has rules for everything. Where to walk, when to speak, how to fold your hands. But some sisters have mastered the art of breaking rules without being caught. Sister Benedetta, for instance, has a lover. You know this not because she told you, but because you saw the folded parchment tucked into her sleeve last week. It was gone by evening, and her cheeks were flushed the next morning. She sings louder at Vespers now, and here's a quirky little nugget. In some convents, nuns developed their own hand signals to secretly communicate during enforced silence. Not basic ones either. Full, sophisticated gestures for "I'm hungry" or "meet me by the east wall after compline." Think of it as spiritual sign language with a sprinkle of gossip. The longer you're here, the more obvious it becomes that these women are surviving. Not always thriving, but enduring, adapting. Like vines growing through stone. And yet, for all the rigidity, there's unpredictability too. Like the time the bishop visited and the kitchen caught fire because someone added too much lard to the fish stew. Or when Sister Justina accidentally locked herself in the wine cellar and was missing for 6 hours, only to reappear swaying gently and claiming divine revelation. Now, the scholarly debate of the night. Were convents genuinely empowering for women, providing rare access to literacy, leadership and autonomy, or were they just gilded cages, reserving patriarchal control under a veil of spiritual purpose? Historians still argue this. Some point to powerful abbesses who ruled over lands and money like queens. Others cite the thousands of women hidden away, their voices erased. You fall asleep most nights with your eyes on the ceiling, watching the flickering candlelight move across the stones like ghostly dancers. You're starting to hear the language of this place, the rustle of habits, the coughs muffled by night, the quiet sobs, the barely suppressed laughter. This place lives, and it's watching. And maybe you're starting to change too. You're finding small rebellions in quiet ways, a smuggled apple, a hidden book, a hymn sung just a little off key. You can feel it. The convent is not what it pretends to be. You take your vows in spring. The ceremony is meant to be solemn, sacred and final, but it feels more like a graduation you didn't want to attend. You kneel before the altar, wearing white, your hair freshly washed and unbound for the last time. There's incense in the air, sweet and choking, and a choir of novice sisters chanting a psalm you've heard so many times it barely registers. The priest asks the questions. You respond, wooden and practiced, "Yes, Father, I do, I will, I vow." They cut your hair. All of it. It falls to the cold stone like a small animal curling up for sleep. This part hits harder than expected. You hadn't realized how much identity was braided into those strands. Now you're just one more shaved head in a sea of veils. The abbess ties your scapula over your shoulders, muttering prayers in Latin that feel more like binding spells. A murmur ripples through the chapel. You're officially wed to Christ now. Which sounds romantic until you remember that your new husband is invisible, omnipotent, and not especially cuddly. Your veil itches. Life as a full sister doesn't look very different from your novice years, except now you're trusted to keep other girls in line. You're invited to chapter meetings, where older nuns argue in hushed tones about things like stolen soap, or whether Sister Caterina's cherry jam was meant for the bishop's visit. It's political theatre dressed in cassocks. and you start to realize, behind all the chanting and ritual, this place runs on the same mechanics as any small village. Gossip, power, food, control. The vow of obedience might be the hardest to keep. You try. But your mind wanders, especially during confession. Because here's the thing, when you're told not to think about something, you absolutely start thinking about it. Lust, desire, bodies. You're supposed to channel all that into prayer and penance, but prayer doesn't touch certain places and penance can only take you so far. Sister Benedetta's not hiding her letters very well anymore. You spot them folded neatly into the psalter she reads during Mass, and one night, you catch her slipping through the infirmary door well past curfew. She's not tending to the sick. You follow, quiet as bare feet on stone will allow, and see the flicker of a candle and two shadows moving together. It's not what the rules allow, it's not what the church teaches, but it is what's happening, and you feel something sharp and strange in your gut. Jealousy maybe, or longing, or just the raw ache of knowing there's something more than what you've been promised. Now let's talk about these vows. Poverty's manageable. You weren't rolling in gold before. Obedience? Frustrating, but survivable. But chastity? That one wraps around you like a corset made of thorns. Because it isn't just about your body. It's about your thoughts, your dreams, your curiosity. Here's our historical fact. Medieval convents often conducted regular purity checks on sisters suspected of breaking their vows. These were physical inspections, awkward, invasive, and deeply humiliating. One chronicler describes a case where an abbess demanded a full-body search because a nun was caught blushing during Mass. But you learn to hide what you feel. You learn the faces to make. You murmur prayers while biting the inside of your cheek to stay focused. And when you dream of soft lips and candlelit rooms, you call it a test from God. Not everyone copes quietly, though. Take Sister Ursula. She was beautiful in that tragic, luminous way. Big eyes, skin like milk, always staring off into the rafters during prayers like she saw angels we couldn't. Then she started talking about visions. First it was simple, a dove hovering during Mass. Then it escalated. Fiery swords, heavenly choirs, bleeding saints walking through the dormitory at night. They called in the bishop. He declared her blessed by divine grace and sanctioned a fast so she could purify her soul. She stopped eating, stopped speaking. By week 3 she was fainting at random, eyes glassy and hands cold. Then she said, Christ visited her in the night, said he kissed her, touched her, lay beside her in the dark. They built a special cell for her. They called her a mystic. Here's your quirky fact. Some mystics wrote about their visions in such erotic language that later theologians had to edit or censor them. One nun claimed she felt Jesus enter her heart through her side and described it in breathless, frankly suspicious detail. The line between holy ecstasy and actual ecstasy, razor thin. And the scholarly debate, whether these visions were genuine spiritual experiences or the result of starvation, stress, and centuries of sexual repression. Some scholars think mystics were the only outlet for women to express desire and power without punishment. Others think they were hallucinating on bad rye bread. You try not to think about it. But at night, the line between sacred and profane starts to blur in your dreams. You're kissing someone, maybe a face from your old village, maybe a nameless priest, and when you wake, you feel guilt clinging to your skin like sweat. You go to confession. The priest doesn't ask for details, but his voice is soft when he tells you to say 15 Ave Marias and fast tomorrow. Then he slips you a second wafer. For strength, he says, smiling too much. You don't know how to name the feeling, but you're pretty sure it isn't holy. It becomes clear over time that many here struggle. Some find solace in prayer, sure, but others bend the rules until they nearly snap. You hear about a convent 2 towns over where a monk was found hiding in the laundry room. Another where 5 nuns vanished in a single night. Rumors, maybe, but they taste like truth. You start to notice the small ways sisters rebel. embroidered initials in hidden hems, love poems hidden in Latin psalms. One even paints tiny lovers on the bottoms of wooden prayer stools. Every day they sit on them, on secret longing, on forbidden joy, and no one knows, except you. There's a saying in the convent, God sees everything, but the abbess sees more. You learn early that there's nothing more dangerous than being noticed too much, or not at all. It's safer to hover in the middle, to be devout but not too devout, quiet but not suspiciously silent, obedient but not servile. The spotlight here can burn, and some sisters get scorched beyond repair, which brings us to Sister Hildegard. She doesn't start as anyone special. A German girl with calloused fingers and an accent thick enough to chew. She's shy, keeps her head down, and spends her days in the herb garden whispering Latin names to parsley. Then one morning she collapses in chapel, eyes rolled back, body stiff. When she comes to, she claims she saw the Virgin Mary in a crown of fire. Everyone gasps. Sister Helena crosses herself so fast she almost dislocates a shoulder. The abbess raises an eyebrow. Hildegard becomes a sensation overnight. She has visions. Not dreams, she insists. Full sensory visitations. She describes them in unnerving detail. Angels with feathered wings made of gold coins. Saints whose voices sound like music underwater. Christ bleeding from his palms while weeping into her lap. It's graphic, intimate, and strangely captivating. The bishop is summoned. He watches her fall into trance and pronounce Latin phrases she was never taught. He declares her touched by divine grace and instructs the abbey to document her revelations. They assign Sister Beatrix, yes, the one who draws naked men, to act as her scribe. You're not sure this is the best pairing. Hildegard's popularity grows. Pilgrims begin to visit, sneaking through cloister walls to touch her hand or receive her blessings. The abbess is torn. On one hand, it's great for the convent's prestige and income. On the other, it's a mess waiting to happen. Here's your historical fact. The real Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century nun, became famous for her mystic visions, music, and scientific writing. She advised emperors, composed hymns, and may have suffered from migraines with aura, possibly the source of her dramatic revelations. But let's get back to our Hildegard, because something feels off. The visions keep coming, but now they have convenient timing. The abbess considers disciplining a sister for breaking silence. Hildegard has a vision about forgiveness. The convent is short on flour. Hildegard hears angels demanding a delivery from a local lord. It's a miracle, or very well-timed manipulation. One night you sneak into the scriptorium. Curiosity, boredom, maybe both. You find Beatrix's notes from the latest vision, full of poetic flourishes, metaphors and corrections in her handwriting. Pages of divine revelation with margin notes like "make this holier" and "add more fire." You realize the truth. Hildegard's visions are staged, enhanced, maybe entirely made up. Do you tell anyone? Of course not. You want to live, the abbess likely suspects. But Hildegard draws donations, silk, wine, even a chalice carved from mother of pearl. As long as the visions keep the roof repaired, no one's asking too many questions. Here's a quirky fact for you. Some nuns used holy illnesses as a shield. Fainting spells, ecstatic trances, divine madness. These could be protection from work, from punishment, even from marriage if someone was trying to remove them from the convent. One nun allegedly claimed to be possessed by the Holy Spirit for over a decade. Convenient. But let's talk about the real drama, the sisters who don't believe. There's a growing rift. Some nuns whisper that Hildegard's been tampering with the incense, adding herbs that make people dizzy. Others say she's been reading apocryphal texts under her mattress, books the church doesn't approve of, full of visions and poetic madness. You're not sure what's true anymore. The scholarly debate of the night, whether medieval mysticism was a legitimate spiritual phenomenon or a socially sanctioned form of female rebellion. Some argue it allowed women a platform, a voice, a way to assert power in a patriarchal system. Others see it as a symptom of isolation, malnutrition, and untreated trauma. You notice that Hildegard is changing. The first time you see her barefoot in the garden at midnight, whispering into the dirt, you write it off as eccentricity. But then she stops speaking altogether during the day. Only at night does she recite her visions, eyes wide, breath short, voice deepened into something that doesn't quite sound like her own. Is she faking it still, or has she started believing it? Then the animals arrive, not real ones, symbols. A stag painted in wine on her door, a dead dove left on her pillow, a cross carved into the wood of her cell upside down. Someone wants her gone, or silenced. One morning, Hildegard doesn't come to Mass. Her cell is locked from the inside. When they break it open, they find her slumped against the wall, eyes open, unblinking, alive but vacant. She won't speak for days. You're pulled in to care for her because apparently your reputation as quiet and not terrible makes you ideal for this job. She looks at you with pupils like pinpricks and mutters something under her breath. They came from the garden. You glance out the window. The herb garden is empty. Later that week, Sister Beatrix burns the latest volume of visions. No one stops her. Life continues, of course. Always does. Hildegard begins to recover. She speaks again, but the visions are gone. So are the pilgrims. The abbess quietly reassigns her to laundry duty. You think about saying something, asking what happened, but some questions are better left unanswered. And honestly, you're starting to see how valuable silence can be. The convent has a way of settling into your bones like dampness in an old house. You stop noticing the cold in the mornings. You get used to the rhythm. Bell, prayer, work, silence, repeat. But under that surface calm, something else always stirs. Whispers, glances, tension that clings to the walls like soot from an old fire. And then, every so often, something cracks open and reminds you just how little separates this place from the world outside, and it starts with a rumour. They always do. This one comes from Sister Agnes, who always knows more than she should and never says how she knows it. She's folding linens with you in the laundry hall when she leans in and says, barely above a breath, "The monks have been coming through the orchard tunnel again." You blink. There's a tunnel? She smirks like you've just asked if fire is hot. According to Agnes, the tunnel was built centuries ago, back when the nunnery and the nearby monastery shared land and occasionally other things. She says it starts in the cellar beneath the storage room and ends in a hollowed-out tree behind the orchard wall. Long bricked up, supposedly, but not well. You laugh, assuming she's exaggerating. But then a week later, you're helping stack winter stores and notice something odd. Behind a row of pickled beets and dried beans, there's a narrow arch in the stone wall, barely noticeable. You press your hand against it, cold, solid. But when you lean in, you feel it. Air. Faint, stale, but moving. That night, you stay up. Sometime after matins, when the rest of the dormitory sinks into sleep, you hear footsteps. Light. Careful. Not the soft shuffle of a sister on the way to relieve herself. These have purpose. You slip from your bed and follow, down the hall, past the kitchen, into the storage room. You keep your distance, crouching behind barrels as the cellar door creaks open. A flicker of candlelight dances along the ceiling, and then you see her, Sister Sabina, young, quiet, devout. She disappears through the narrow opening. A heartbeat later, another figure follows, robed, broad-shouldered, definitely not a nun. You stay rooted there, heart thudding, cold sweat blooming beneath your scapula. She's not the only one, you realize. Over the next few nights, more sisters vanish for brief spells, always after midnight, always returning before dawn. Some look flushed, some look blissfully dazed, some look like nothing happened at all. Eventually Agnes corners you again. You saw it, didn't you? You nod, because what else can you do? Don't be so shocked, she whispers, plucking lint from your sleeve. They're men. We're women. God might be watching, but he has terrible timing. Here's your historical fact. Many medieval convents were built dangerously close to male monasteries. Some were only separated by walls, orchards, or even shared chapels. There are documented cases of secret rendezvous, some discovered, some not, between monks and nuns. One bishop referred to his local convent as a brothel of black veils. But how do they get away with it? Well, let's just say Sister Benedicta, keeper of the cellar keys, sleeps deeply and keeps a bottle of elderberry wine under her bed, and the abbess, she's not blind. But as long as nothing scandalous explodes into public knowledge, no pregnancies, no missing sisters, no open defiance, she looks the other way. Power, after all, is a delicate thing. You begin to see signs everywhere. Rosaries missing beads, scratched initials on the underside of prayer benches, even a tiny pressed flower hidden between pages of a breviary. Then it escalates. A novice, Isolde, goes missing for an entire day. When she returns, her veil is crooked, her sandals are muddy, and her face carries that look you only ever see in stained glass depictions of martyrs and lovers. When questioned, she claims to have been praying in solitude. No one believes her. Soon after, Sister Theodora starts vomiting after meals. Some whisper she's sick, others whisper she's very healthy, and that she's been visited by Brother Elric, who has notably wide shoulders and always seems to be delivering sacramental wine at odd hours. Which brings us to our quirky fact. Some convents had secret birthing rooms, hidden chambers or infirmary nooks used to quietly deal with miraculous pregnancies. Infants were sometimes sent to orphanages, abandoned at church steps, or handed off to trusted servants. The records are patchy, deliberately of course, but midwives knew the signs. You begin to notice Theodora missing chapel more often. She walks slower, keeps her hands folded over her stomach. She's not hiding it well, but no one confronts her. Not yet. The scholarly debate tonight, whether medieval church leaders truly believed in the purity of nuns, or whether they simply pretended to. Some historians argue that everyone knew these incidents happened, but preferred silence to scandal. Others insist that the ideal of the virgin nun was enforced with brutal consistency, and any failure was punished severely. The truth, as usual, is somewhere between. You start to feel something new. Fear. Not for yourself, not yet, but for the fragility of it all. How one whispered rumour, one slip, one swollen belly could bring the entire house down. Convents, it turns out, are not made of stone. They're made of secrets and shame, and both can crack under pressure. Then one night the tunnel is sealed. No warning. Just a sudden wall of fresh stones and the scent of lime mortar. The access is gone, vanished, and with it, the nightly visits. The sisters who used it walked differently after that. Some relieved, some devastated. Theodora stops eating altogether. No one says why it was sealed, but a few days later a visiting priest leaves in a hurry, face pale, lips tight. And Theodora? She disappears. Officially sent to a sister convent for rest. Unofficially, no one hears from her again. That's when it hits you. This place may look like a prison, but it's really a battlefield. And the quietest wars are often the bloodiest. There's a shadow hanging over the dormitory now. Theodora's absence lingers like a cough no one acknowledges. Everyone hears it, but no one dares speak of it aloud. Her bed remains made, her sandals tucked beneath it, her pillow still slightly indented. The younger novices ask once, maybe twice, where she went, and then learn quickly that questions don't get answered here. Only prayers do. Still, not everyone is content with quiet grief. Sister Julienne, sharp-eyed and sharper-tongued, starts muttering openly about injustice. She says it wasn't Theodora's fault, that it takes two bodies to make a scandal, that maybe Brother Elric should have been sent away too, or branded, or worse. The other sisters hush her, but it's too late. The seed's been planted, and that seed blooms in the strangest of ways. One evening, after Vespers, the chapel is silent except for the echo of sandals on stone. A few sisters remain behind to pray, or at least to look convincingly holy in case the abbess walks through. But then a sound interrupts them. Weeping. Harsh, hiccuping sobs from somewhere near the altar. You peek around the carved pew and see her, Sister Clemence. Bent forward, hands clutched at her sides like she's trying to keep herself from unraveling. A few others gather. No one touches her. That would be too intimate, too dangerous. But someone kneels beside her. Another sister hums a hymn, softly, a low, steady drone of comfort. And for the first time, you see what a convent is when it isn't busy being cruel. It's also a sisterhood. A strange, dysfunctional, suspicious sisterhood, yes, but a sisterhood nonetheless. That night something shifts. It starts with silence and turns into solidarity. And as with most revolutions in convent walls, it begins with ink. A week later, a parchment is found in the scriptorium. Tucked between the psalms and the missals, a small scroll written in a neat, anonymous hand. It's not a prayer, it's a list of sins. Not the usual "I coveted the jam" or "I dreamed of a man" stuff. These are real sins. Secrets, scandals, exposures. Sister Helena hides meat in her cell. Brother Elric was seen beneath the fig tree. The abbess took payment for silence. Panic spreads. Who wrote it? How did they know? Are there more? There are. By the end of the month, 5 scrolls have surfaced, each tucked in a different sacred text, each naming a new set of transgressions, some truths, some exaggerations, some outright lies. But how do you tell which is which when even the accusation leaves a stain? The abbess reacts the way you'd expect. Lockdown. Every sister is questioned. Night patrols are doubled. The scriptorium is sealed to all but the most trusted. But it's like trying to trap smoke with your bare hands. The scrolls keep appearing. Here's your historical fact. Medieval convents often served as places of both spiritual devotion and scandal management. Some housed noblewomen who brought political baggage with them. Others were notorious for infighting. In fact, court records from 14th century Germany show a group of nuns once hired a notary to draft a formal lawsuit against their own abbess, citing corruption and cruelty. Which leads us to our next figure of fascination, Sister Perpetua. She's ancient. No one knows how old exactly. She might have arrived with the foundation stones. She walks like her joints are made of cracking branches, and her eyes are the colour of oversteeped tea. She speaks rarely, but when she does, her words carry the kind of gravity that makes even the abbess pause. Perpetua has seen it all. Young novices fainting from hunger, nuns slipping into the gardens at night, confessions that were more fantasies than sins. And when you find her one morning staring down at the 5th scroll, you expect horror, or anger, or at least the sign of the cross. Instead, she chuckles. "It's about time," she says, then walks off muttering something about truth being the only real incense. You start to wonder, is she behind it? Is this her slow-motion rebellion? Or maybe she's just seen so many cycles of sin and penance that nothing surprises her anymore. Here's your quirky fact. In some convents, elderly nuns were feared as much as they were revered. Whispers of secret rituals, pagan holdovers, and midnight rites clung to the oldest sisters. Some were accused of being witches. A few were even dragged before inquisitors for keeping charms or speaking with spirits. Perpetua definitely has that vibe. The open secret now is that nothing in this convent is sacred. Not the walls, not the prayers, not even the sisters themselves. The scrolls are proof. And the fear they've stirred isn't just about exposure, it's about what comes next. Because then, one morning, a scroll appears addressed directly to the abbess. It's short, brutal. You wear your veil like a crown. We see the thorns. The chapel that day is dead quiet. The abbess doesn't speak during prayers. She doesn't even sit. She just stands at the altar, hands folded, lips pressed white. The scholarly debate here? Whether medieval convents offered women a unique form of power in a world that otherwise silenced them, or whether they simply recreated patriarchal systems within their own walls. Some abbesses ruled like queens, commanding land, money, and men. Others were little more than enforcers of someone else's rules. You watch the abbess closely over the next few days. Something in her has cracked, not visibly, not publicly, but the way she holds her hands tighter, the way her gaze lingers on the older sisters, the way she checks the scriptorium doors 3 times before walking away. You don't know who's writing the scrolls, but you know this much: someone's had enough, and they're not afraid anymore. You lie in bed that night, staring at the dark ceiling, wondering what would happen if all the secrets spilled out at once. Not just Theodora's, not just Sabina's, yours too. And for the first time you start to hope they do. You wake to a voice whispering your name in the dark. Not loud, not urgent, just enough to drag you up out of sleep with a jolt that leaves your heart ticking like a broken metronome. You squint into the pitch and see her. Sister Aurelia, crouched beside your cot, veil askew, face pale and damp with sweat. "Come," she breathes. "It's happening again." You follow, because what else can you do? Curiosity is your most faithful sin. She leads you through the dormitory, down the narrow side hall behind the chapel, and into the old sacristy. A room mostly used for forgotten things now. Broken candles, worn-out hymnals, pew cushions that smell like wet stone. Inside, 3 other sisters are already gathered in a circle. The youngest, a girl barely 16, is weeping softly. Another is scribbling furiously into a small notebook. There's tension in the air, nervous, electric, and something else you can't quite name. Excitement? Then Aurelia holds up the notebook. "She's remembering," she says. "You realize what you're seeing. This isn't prayer. It's confession, but not to God." Each sister begins to speak, slowly at first, then faster, as if releasing something they've been clutching for too long. One talks about lying during vows, another admits to stealing relics and selling them to a travelling friar for wine. Someone else quietly confesses to laying with a novice during Lent. The girl scribbles it all down, names omitted, identities blurred. But you know who they mean. Aurelia turns to you. "Do you have anything to say?" You almost laugh. You have too much to say. You're so full of secrets, it's a miracle you're not leaking ink. You nod. The circle continues for weeks. They call it the Midnight Chapter. No one admits who started it. No one knows how many attend. Some show up once and never again. Others become regulars, always wrapped in cloak and shadow, sharing bits of themselves in exchange for something they can't quite name. Release, maybe, or redemption, of a kind the church could never give. Here's your historical fact. Medieval nunneries often practiced internal confessions outside the formal system. Some nuns confessed to older, trusted sisters instead of priests, particularly when the sin was embarrassing or socially dangerous. These unofficial systems kept the peace, and the abbess's paperwork manageable. And then, one night, it happens. You're in the chapter, your voice low, retelling something that happened during your first year here. A kiss stolen during a harvest feast, behind the storage crates, with a visiting friar who smelled like roasted apples and regret. You barely finish the sentence when a loud crack breaks through the silence. The door slams open. Sister Margareta stands there, arms crossed, face thundercloud dark. She's not a small woman, and her presence eats the air out of the room. "What is this?" she hisses. No one answers. She steps into the circle and plucks the notebook from the girl's lap. Her eyes skim the pages. Her mouth tightens with every line. She doesn't say anything. She just turns, walks out, and slams the door behind her. The fallout is immediate. The next day, Aurelia is gone. Sent to the infirmary, they say, but no one sees her. The notebook disappears. The youngest girl is moved to a different dormitory. And you're questioned. Not overtly accused, but circled by suspicion like smoke curling from a smothered flame. Sister Margareta doesn't smile anymore when she passes you. Not that she smiled much before. The abbess strangely doesn't mention it at all, which of course is far more terrifying. That silence doesn't last. Weeks later, a notice is read aloud during chapter. All future confessions must be directed through ordained clergy. Any unsanctioned spiritual gatherings are henceforth forbidden. It's followed by a prayer for purity and a thinly veiled warning. But the midnight chapter isn't gone, it just moves deeper underground. Now scrolls begin appearing again, but they're different. These aren't accusatory lists, they're stories, vignettes, miniature autobiographies of women who live in shadows. One describes the loss of a child before she ever entered the convent. Another details her time as a servant girl and the hands that wouldn't leave her alone. One even claims she killed a man before taking the veil. Some sisters call them lies, others call them courage. Here's your quirky fact. A few surviving manuscripts from medieval convents contain notations and scribbles in the margins that modern scholars believe were coded messages. Not just casual doodles, but intentional symbols, possibly marking stories of abuse, loss, or hidden romantic liaisons. Think of it as medieval graffiti with soul. But this underground storytelling raises another issue: intimacy. And that's how you get pulled into that conversation about desire, love, lust, all the things you're supposed to keep buried under layers of wool and psalms. It starts small. You're sitting beside Sister Leanne, who's mending a torn sleeve while humming a tune you've never heard. "It's from the village," she says. "They sing it during weddings." She pauses. "Do you remember what a wedding sounds like?" You nod, but the memory's fuzzy now. Candles, laughter, bells. She looks at you, then asks, "Have you ever loved someone you weren't supposed to?" It feels like a trap, but it's not. You say yes. So does she. And in that moment you realize what's never spoken but always felt here. That love doesn't vanish behind walls. It just mutates. It bends, folds, reshapes itself into whatever it must to survive. Some sisters fall for the sound of another's voice in chapel. Others for the quiet moments shared folding robes or touching hands over shared ink pots. There are no wedding rings here, no stolen nights in meadows, but there is love. Sometimes even lust. And in places this dry, any drop of tenderness is a miracle. Tonight's scholarly debate: whether lesbian relationships between nuns were common or exaggerated by scandal-hungry critics. The church certainly denounced unnatural acts, but convent records suggest deep emotional bonds, possibly romantic, were not only real, but sometimes quietly accepted, until they weren't. One day, a sister is found in the garden, kneeling beside the well, crying softly with a letter clenched in her hand. You don't know who she loved, but you know what it cost. And that night, during Compline, as you sing Salve Regina, you look across the chapel and see Leanne watching you. Just watching, and you think, maybe some sins are worth it. There's something deeply ironic about the way the church handles sin. It promises forgiveness, yet makes you bleed for it. Offers grace, but only after humiliation. And in a convent, the standards are even higher. Perfection painted in plaster and hung above your bed while you toss and turn with thoughts that would make a bishop faint. So it really shouldn't be surprising when Sister Caterina turns up pregnant. Not noticeably at first, just a little rounder, a little paler, skipping meals, missing mass, walking slowly and breathing like the air is heavier now. At first, people whisper that it's a tumor or an infection, something soft and awful growing where it shouldn't. But one afternoon she leans against the chapel wall mid-prayer and slides slowly to the floor. When her veil shifts, the truth is laid bare. It's impossible to mistake. You're not supposed to know what a pregnant body looks like, but you do. Everyone does. Every girl raised in a village has seen the bulge beneath a linen dress, the hand that instinctively settles over it, the way the hips shift to protect what's coming. No one says it out loud. No one dares. The abbess has her moved to the infirmary that night. Fever, she says. Contagion risk. But none of the sisters buy it. We've all seen that particular fever before, and it doesn't end with healing. By morning, all her belongings are gone. You learn from Sister Julienne that Caterina's been taken to another house, one further south, closer to the sea. A place for difficult cases. It has a name, But people don't use it. Just call it the quiet house. When sisters disappear into it, they don't come back. You lie awake for hours that night, haunted by the look in Katerina's eyes as they led her away. Not shame, not fear. Something worse. Resignation. Here's your historical fact. There are multiple recorded cases of pregnant nuns in medieval Europe being quietly removed to rural facilities, often under the guise of illness or spiritual retreat. These retreats were, in effect, religious exile. Some gave birth and returned stripped of status. Others never returned at all. You can't stop thinking about who the father was. No one ever says. Could have been a priest. Could have been a visiting nobleman. Could have been another sister. The silence is the loudest part, which leads to an unspoken question. What actually happens to a child born behind cloistered walls? Sometimes they're quietly given to orphanages, sometimes left at the steps of monasteries with a token, a ribbon, a scrap of embroidered cloth, something to mark them, just in case anyone dares to claim them later. In rare cases, a family member steps in, pretending the baby was born of some unnamed village girl. But most often, the child simply disappears into the world, like mist rising off morning stones. One nun, Sister Genevieve, tells you, in a hushed voice over shared sewing, that she had a sister once, born in the convent, raised in the village nearby. They met once during a festival. The girl never knew. She had my eyes, Genevieve says, but she danced like she'd never lived behind walls. That night you start noticing how many sisters glance down when the word mother is spoken. Here's your quirky fact. In some medieval convents, small rooms called wombs, yes, really, were carved into the infirmary wing. They weren't for actual childbirth, but for spiritual gestation. Sisters would enter for days or weeks of solitary prayer, emerging reborn. It was symbolic. Except, in a few cases, birth did happen inside. The metaphor got very real. The contradictions here never end. You're told to erase your body, but it refuses to be erased. You're supposed to mortify the flesh, but the flesh has its own plans. Cycles, desires, betrayals. You're told you belong to God alone, but that's not how the world works. The body leaks, the soul breaks. Life doesn't wait for your piety to catch up. And then it happens again. Not the pregnancy. Something different. A discovery. You're in the scriptorium, scraping parchment clean for reuse. It's dull work, but you find a page that gives you pause. Not because of the words, those are inane, another letter from one abbey to another begging for beeswax, but because of what's beneath the words. Faint lines, ghostly, barely visible. A palimpsest. You hold it to the window, angling it toward the light. Slowly a different text reveals itself, like something rising from beneath water. It's not scriptures, it's a letter, a personal one, written in a feminine hand, flourished, romantic, almost poetic. You read, "I love, I dream of your hair spread across my pillow. I wake with the taste of your name still on my tongue." You stop breathing and it's not signed. No names, no clues. But it's old, older than you, older than anyone living here now. A buried story, literal and figurative, hidden beneath layers of obedience. You tuck the page into your sleeve. Later you show it to Sister Leanne. She reads it silently, then presses her fingers to the ink, reverent. "You know what this means, right?" she asks. You nod. Love has always lived here, not the sterile spiritual kind, the messy kind, the kind with desire and risk and consequence. It's in the walls, beneath the floors, scraped off and overwritten but never fully gone. Tonight's scholarly debate, whether romantic love between nuns was criminalized more by doctrine or by fear. Some theologians argue that same-sex love was a sin against nature, while others conveniently ignored it altogether. There are surviving letters between nuns from different houses, dozens of them, that read like full-blown love affairs, yet church records often omit these entirely, calling them close friendships or misguided affections. You and Leanne sit in the scriptorium long after you should have gone to bed, the letter between you, its author long dead, but suddenly more real than half the saints on the chapel walls. "You ever written one like this?" she asks, voice barely above a whisper. You hesitate and then you say, "No, but I think I could." That night, with a single candle flickering at your bedside, you do. You don't sign it. You don't send it. You just slip it beneath your mattress like a seed waiting for rain. There's a new sister in the convent now, and that's always a small disruption. New energy, new secrets, new eyes that haven't yet learned where not to look. Her name is Sister Law, and she arrives with a tightly bound trunk, ink-stained fingertips, and the kind of posture that screams noble blood. She's pale, poised, and far too calm for someone who's just been banished from the world. You catch the gossip before she's even unpacked her things. She was sent here after a scandal, which is the polite way of saying she was caught doing something someone important didn't like. One version claims she seduced her tutor. Another insists she refused a politically arranged marriage. A third says she struck a bishop. You like that one best. It's clearly nonsense, but still, imagine the audacity. From the start, she doesn't play by the usual rules. She walks too confidently, speaks too clearly, and never lowers her gaze unless she's bored. The older sisters dislike her immediately. The younger ones idolize her in secret. You? You're not sure yet. You cross paths in the scriptorium. She's transcribing an illuminated manuscript, gold leaf already smeared on her wrist, when she glances up and says, "You're the one who found the letter." You freeze. What letter? The smile is slow, sharp. "Don't worry, your secret's safe. I just know things." You spend the rest of the day thinking about that, wondering what else she knows, and how. Law slips into convent life like a fox through tall grass, never fully blending in, but moving with deliberate grace. She sings louder during Vespers, takes extra turns in the scriptorium, and when she kneels in chapel, it's with the kind of performative humility that draws more attention than silence ever could. It's Sister Julian who finally says what everyone's thinking. That girl's hiding something. But of course she is, aren't you? The tension builds until it finally snaps. Over a book, of all things. You're in the scriptorium again, hunting for a missing volume of Psalms when you find it tucked behind the bench where Law works. But when you reach for it, something else falls loose. A folded piece of parchment, faintly perfumed, bearing the crest of a noble house. It's not addressed to anyone, but it's written in a style you now recognize well. Half confession, half seduction. "You said I was your penance, but you, my love, you are my absolution." You fold it shut, heart thudding.
No.
Law walks in a moment later, sees the book in your hands, and stops. For the first time since she arrived, she looks rattled. Just a flicker. She doesn't ask if you read it. She doesn't have to. Does it matter, you ask? She walks past you, carefully takes the parchment, and says very softly, "Only if you intend to tell someone." You don't. Not because you're afraid, though maybe you should be, but because you recognize that look in her eyes. It's not arrogance. It's grief. A mourning dressed up in defiance. Here's your historical fact. During the 15th century, a French abbey recorded an investigation into two nuns accused of unnatural intimacy. Their love letters were discovered hidden inside hollowed-out prayer books. They were forcibly separated, publicly humiliated, and made to sleep in isolation cells for 3 years. One of them died before the punishment ended. That's the danger Law lives with. Not exposure, erasure, and so you protect her secret. A few nights later, she leaves something for you in return, pressed between the pages of your prayer book. A single line. "I think you would have loved her too." You don't ask who she means. That's how these things survive here, in fragments, glances, scribbled lines, pressed flowers and half-heard hymns. Love in this place isn't bold. It's buried, carefully, reverently, and sometimes defiantly. Here's your quirky fact. In a 14th century convent in what is now modern-day Belgium, an excavation revealed a hidden drawer beneath the altar floor. Inside were scraps of parchment containing poems, not prayers, not scripture, but secular verse. One line read, "My heart is a bird behind your ribs." To this day, no one knows who wrote them. But back to Law. The abbess starts watching her more closely. You can tell. There's a new sharpness in her tone when she calls on her in chapter. A pause before she hands her the host. You know that look. It means danger is brewing. And then one day, Law doesn't show up for prayers. She's not in the dormitory, not in the scriptorium, not in the chapel or garden. By evening, a notice is read. Sister Law has been called to serve at a neighbouring convent in the north. She left this morning under escort. But she didn't. You know she didn't. She would have said goodbye, left another letter, something. Instead, her things are still in her trunk. Her prayer book lies open on her cot. No one talks about it. That night, you sneak into the dormitory and open the drawer beneath her cot. Inside, wrapped in a strip of linen, is a final note. If they come for you, run through the laundry passage. The bricks behind the far shelf are hollow. I only wish I'd had time to write you more. You read it 5 times, then hide it away. Tonight's scholarly debate? Whether the disappearance of certain nuns, especially outspoken or unconventional ones, was due to illness, reassignment, or quiet punishment. Some were moved to remote houses. Some were sent home in disgrace. Some were never documented again. It's one of the church's oldest habits. When something doesn't fit, it simply vanishes. You lie in bed that night thinking about Law, whether she escaped, whether she was dragged out screaming, whether she's still alive. You dream of hollow bricks and far shelves and women with ink-stained hands disappearing into the dark, never looking back. You start spending more time in the laundry hall, and not because the work brings you any kind of joy. It smells like boiled lye and damp wool, and your hands are permanently pruned from the steam. But behind the far shelf, past the baskets of soiled robes and the squeaky pulley window that never quite closes, is that wall, the one Law's letter mentioned. You've touched it a dozen times now, tapped the stones, run your fingers along the mortar, but nothing's obvious. No hollow spots, no gaps. Still, you know something's there. You start watching the sisters more carefully too, who lingers near the laundry, who seems to be watching you, who suddenly takes an interest in your prayer habits. It's exhausting. You find yourself speaking less, shrinking smaller, folding in on yourself like a scroll sealed with wax. One evening, Sister Julianne corners you by the water pump. They've started going through trunks, she whispers, eyes darting. Yours hasn't been touched yet. Be careful. You nod, trying not to look rattled, but you are. You go back to your cot and begin removing anything that could be misread. Poems, notes, even your own diary. You smuggle them out 2 at a time, slipping pages into the sleeves of books in the scriptorium, or hiding them beneath loose tiles in the herb garden wall. It's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition. Because you've seen what happens when someone becomes inconvenient. Take Sister Marta, one of the quiet ones. Shy, diligent, eyes always on the floor, never cause trouble. Then one day she volunteers a question during scripture reading. If God forgave the Magdalene, why can't the church forgive those who love wrongly? Silence, sharp and cutting. 2 days later, she's reassigned to the kitchens, permanently. The kind of assignment usually reserved for penance or punishment. You catch her crying beside the turnips. Was it what I said? She asks, voice cracking. You don't answer. You just hug her, gently, because that's all you can offer anymore. Here's your historical fact. Many medieval convents kept strict control over their sisters' speech, especially during readings or discussions. Speaking out, especially with theological curiosity, was often considered disruptive, and some nuns were punished for even quoting scripture without approval. One abbess in 15th century Spain reportedly banned conversation during all meals and recreational time to prevent the spread of dissent. But sometimes silence is more dangerous than words, which brings us back to the wall. It's the night before Pentecost and the convent is buzzing with preparations. White flowers, fresh linens, endless rounds of cleaning and incense blending. You slip away after dinner, back to the laundry, the room humming with leftover steam. You wait until the last sister leaves, muttering about Vespers, then you move the shelf. It's heavier than it looks, but you manage. Behind it, the stones look the same, but there's one near the bottom corner that's a shade too pale. Newer. You press it. Nothing. You knock. Hollow. Your heart stutters. You press harder and it shifts, just a fraction. You scramble for something, an iron ladle from the sink, and begin levering it gently. The brick slides back. Behind it, darkness. A narrow tunnel. Dirt walls. A musky smell like wet parchment and old breath. You don't go in, not yet. But you know it's real now. You slip the brick back into place, return everything to how it was, and walk away as calmly as your shaking legs will allow. That night, you dream of Laura again, her voice saying, "If they come for you." Only now she's holding out her hand, not leading you away, inviting you in. You're woken the next morning by the bell and by chaos. The novices are whispering. The dormitory smells like wax and smoke. Sister Clemence is missing. You listen carefully during chapter, but the abbess says nothing. No explanation. No prayer for the departed. Just the usual readings delivered through gritted teeth. You know what this means. Later you find one of Clemence's books still under her cot. Inside, pressed like a dying memory, is a single petal. Dried, curled, still faintly red. A rose. She used to leave those at the feet of the Virgin statue every feast day. Always just one. Always without a word. And now she's gone. Here's your quirky fact. In some convents, nuns developed codes using flowers, what they left where and when. A violet in the refectory meant I'm being watched. A rosemary sprig near the altar signalled mourning. A rose, especially a red one, often meant love, or loss, sometimes both. You start looking for symbols everywhere now. Scratches in the wall near the garden bench. 3 dots carved into a soap dish. A braid looped a certain way. You don't know what they all mean, but you know they mean something. One night you find another note, tucked into the hem of your veil, folded so small it's almost invisible. Soon. That's it. No signature, no hint, just that single word. Your chest tightens. Tonight's scholarly debate. Whether acts of rebellion in convents, big or small, were expressions of agency or desperation. Were these women building networks of resistance, or just clawing for survival in the only ways they could? Some say nuns were political actors in their own right. Others argue they were trapped, lashing out in the dark. You walk the convent like a ghost now, half there, half waiting. Watching doors, watching faces, listening for footsteps that might stop outside your cell in the middle of the night. Every prayer feels heavier, every silence feels suspicious, but the tunnel is real, the exit exists, and somewhere out there so does the truth. You wake in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps. Quick, deliberate, just soft enough to be someone trying not to be heard. You're out of your cot before you're even fully awake. Heart already pounding, fingers fumbling to slide your veil back over your sleep-matted hair. You don't grab a candle. Light attracts questions. Instead, you follow the shadow slipping down the corridor, past the dormitory door and toward the eastern wing, toward the laundry. Of course, your bare feet whisper across cold stone. You press yourself into the wall each time the figure ahead pauses. You recognize her by the set of her shoulders, Sister Julienne. She carries something small and square beneath her arm, tucked under her robe like a secret. She disappears into the laundry room, door closing with a quiet click. You wait a few heartbeats, then follow. Inside, steam curls along the floor. The fire in the corner hearth is long dead, leaving a hush of cooled ash. Julienne is crouched behind the far shelf, hands already on the pale brick you discovered weeks ago. She doesn't seem surprised when you approach. "I wondered when you'd come," she says. You stare at her, unsure of what this is. Escape? Some secret mission? She doesn't wait for you to speak. Just pulls the brick free, and behind it, in the hollow, sets the small book she was carrying. "I'm not leaving," she says softly, "but this has to." You crouch beside her, heart slowing. The book is simple, rough leather binding, no title, but you can tell by the thickness of the pages and the way her fingers linger on it that it's more than just parchment. You glance up at her. "It's the real archive," she says. "Not the one in the scriptorium, the real one." Your hands shake as you reach inside and pull it out, flipping open the first page. Neat handwriting, multiple authors, a collection of stories, letters, names. Some familiar, some long gone. The midnight chapter, in ink, preserved. Julianne says, "If they find this, we'll all be stripped of our vows. Or worse." She pulls the brick back into place and stands, brushing dust from her skirt. "I don't trust the abbess, but I trust you." And then she leaves. You don't sleep that night. You sit with the book in your lap, your candle guttering low beside you, eyes darting from line to line like they're breathing. This isn't just gossip, this is testimony. Records of dreams, rebellions, regrets. One letter, dated almost 30 years ago, describes a forbidden affair between an abbess and a visiting noblewoman. Another names a bishop who abused confessions for years, and the 4 sisters who exposed him, only to be punished for it. It's all here. You understand now why they hide it. Here's your historical fact. While official church archives contain carefully sanitized records, several convents were later discovered to have maintained parallel internal histories, clandestine writings that chronicled real experiences, grievances, and abuses. These counter-histories were often hidden in walls, inside altar stones, or beneath floorboards. Few survive, but the ones that do are radically honest. This changes everything. The next day, during chapter, you glance around the room with new eyes. How many others know about the archive? How many contributed to it? Sister Helena's gaze lingers too long on the floor. Beatrix hums while she polishes a candle holder, a tune you've heard described in one of the entries. They know. You're part of something now, something quiet but powerful. A web beneath the floorboards. The real convent, hidden beneath the one the abbess parades in front of visiting clergy. The rest of the week is a blur of long stares, subtle nods, too careful silences. You think you're doing a good job hiding the secret, until the abbess calls you to her chamber. She sits at her desk, hands folded on a thick leather-bound Bible, her habit immaculate, not a wrinkle or hair out of place. You stand before her, palms damp. "I've received word," she says, "that some of the sisters are participating in unsanctioned gatherings, exchanges of letters, emotional attachments." She looks up. Her eyes are like polished stone. "I trust," she continues, "that you would come to me if you knew anything of the sort." She waits. The air between you is thick with 1,000 unspoken things. You could say yes. You could lie. You should lie. Instead you say, "Isn't emotional attachment what Christ asks of us?" She doesn't answer, just stares, long enough to make your skin itch. Then she nods, slowly. "You may go." As you turn to leave, she adds, "Sister Clemence has not been heard from. I pray that nothing in your heart remains entangled." You freeze. So she does know. Here's your quirky fact. In one notorious 15th century convent in Austria, a private Book of Faults was kept not by the abbess, but by the sisters themselves. It detailed infractions the leadership committed, greed, favoritism, hypocrisy, and was read aloud in secret at night. When it was discovered, the entire convent was placed under papal investigation, and several sisters were relocated. The book vanished soon after. You check on the archive daily now. You've hidden it better, deeper inside the hollow, beneath a folded linen to muffle the scent of parchment. Every time you open it, it feels like a quiet act of revolution, a sacred thing. One night, there's a new page inside, handwriting you don't recognize. "I kissed her once, just once, in the herb garden, behind the rosemary. It was brief, terrifying, and the most real thing I've felt since I took the veil. No name, no date. You close the book, your fingers trembling. Later that night, as you pass Sister Leanne in the corridor, she brushes your arm and whispers, "Rosemary." You turn to look at her, but she's already gone. Tonight's scholarly debate, whether acts of record-keeping like this, hidden, personal, sometimes illegal, qualify as history in the academic sense, or whether they are something else entirely. Some scholars argue that without the authority of the Church, these writings are unreliable, biased. Others say that because they lack Church approval, they may be the most honest stories we have from these women. You go to bed that night feeling the book's weight still in your hands, even though it's safely hidden again, and you realize, for the first time, you're not afraid anymore, not entirely. By the time summer rolls in and the bell tower begins its slow, sweaty expansion, from mere echo chamber to full-blown oven, the convent seems to have split into two silent factions, those who suspect and those who know. You start seeing it in little things, the way Sister Margaretta eyes you during meals, as if waiting for you to crack, the way Sister Beatrix smiles too knowingly when you pass her in the corridor, the way the abbess' gaze lingers on the younger novices a second too long when assigning chores, as if measuring their capacity for secrecy. It becomes clear, by mid-July, that no one is really in charge anymore. The abbess might hold the keys, the records, the title, but there's a second court forming underneath her, quieter, less orderly, and far more dangerous. The scrolls have returned. Not nailed to doors this time, not tucked between choir books, but passed hand to hand. You receive one during kitchen duty, slipped into your apron pocket with a folded crust of bread. The handwriting is unfamiliar, blocky, almost crude. She took more than her share of the tax wine again. Count the barrels. You crumple it and toss it into the oven's coals. You don't even check the wine because you don't care. The scrolls have stopped feeling like resistance. They feel like surveillance, retaliation. Suddenly everyone's watching everyone, not out of loyalty, but to get ahead of the next accusation. That's when the abbess makes her move. It's not dramatic. No fire and brimstone sermon, no public lashings. Just a new rule posted outside the refectory. All correspondence between sisters must be approved and copied by the abbess's hand. Any failure to comply will result in removal from the order. Sister Julienne reads it aloud at breakfast with the kind of theatrical flair usually reserved for Holy Week. The room goes silent. Then comes the kicker. All private journals must be surrendered by week's end. You swallow hard. Here's your historical fact. Several medieval convents had strict policies regarding written materials. Nuns' letters were often censored or collected, especially during times of religious tension. In some Benedictine houses, personal writing was outright forbidden, seen as a gateway to pride, heresy, or even erotic fantasy. Some nuns disobeyed. Their writings are now all we have of their voices. You hide your journal in the herb garden that night, wrapped in waxed cloth and buried beneath the mint patch. It feels poetic in a way, burying memories beneath something that smells like purity. You hope the irony pleases God. But the abbess isn't just after paper. She begins rotating room assignments. The oldest nuns are moved to the outer cells. The novices are split from their mentors. You're assigned to sleep beside Sister Teresa, a woman whose defining characteristic is her uncanny ability to recite full chapters of Leviticus while chewing. Every evening is suddenly suspect. Who's talking too long at Vespers? Who slipped away during chapel cleaning? Who lingers too long over the wash basin in the garden, writing on scraps of linen and rinsing the ink into the soil? One evening you find Leanne waiting for you by the laundry passage. She doesn't speak, just hands you something. An old rosary, worn smooth, the crucifix wrapped in waxed linen. Inside the wrapping, tucked beside the beads, is a note. "We move tomorrow. Come if you're ready." No name, no instructions, just that. And you know, it's time. That night you sleep with one eye open and both boots beneath your bed. The tunnel has sat in your thoughts like a pulsing second heartbeat for weeks. Now it's real. It's here. But when you return to the laundry room at dawn, it's empty. The shelf is untouched, the bricks sealed. The room cold. You wait, heart thudding in your ears, but no one comes. The hour passes, the bells ring, and the silence remains. Something went wrong. That morning 2 sisters are missing. Not ones you'd expect, not rebels. Sister Aurelia and Sister Immaculata. Quiet, loyal, invisible. Too invisible. And now, gone. Official word says they were sent to the priory for advanced theological study. You don't buy it. No one does. Here's your quirky fact. In a convent outside Florence, records from 1486 describe a group of 5 nuns who disappeared in the night after a fire. While it was officially attributed to arson and panic, later evidence revealed the fire was staged with oil and straw. The women were never found. Some believe they escaped. Others say they were buried in the walls by the abbess herself. You start checking the laundry room daily, just in case. Not because you expect a rescue, but because it feels like honouring the ones who tried. Meanwhile, the archive remains untouched. You add to it when you can. Small entries, stories half whispered by candlelight, confessions disguised as fiction. One, written by someone with precise, almost calligraphic handwriting, tells the story of a nun who once climbed the bell tower to scream. No one heard her over the bells. You read it twice, then again, and you think, maybe the bells are the point. Tonight's scholarly debate. Whether convent walls were meant to keep women safe, or to keep them contained. Some argue the rise of female monasticism was a step toward agency, in a world that offered women little else. Others argue it was the Church's final effort to silence unruly women under the guise of sanctity. You look around the chapel during evening prayers and realize just how many of these women are carrying something. Grief, rage, stories that don't fit inside the scripture they're forced to copy day after day. And yet, they keep going, keep singing, keep pretending not to see what's right in front of them. Leanne doesn't speak to you for days after the failed escape. Not out of anger, but out of guilt, maybe, or mourning. You pass each other in silence now, both afraid to ask the same question. Who betrayed them? Because it wasn't a guard, it wasn't the abbess. It had to be one of us. The rain starts that week and doesn't stop. It seeps through every crack in the convent's stone bones, makes the air feel like wet linen pressed against your face. Even the candles struggle to stay lit, their flames shivering like nervous secrets. The walls feel closer now. The cloisters smell of mildew and regret. Everything is damp, including your mood. This is when the real old stories begin to surface. Not the tidy legends embroidered into chapel tapestries, but the ones muttered near hearths or passed in crooked Latin by sisters who've been here too long and seen too much. Sister Perpetua, yes, still breathing somehow, though she's definitely more myth than flesh at this point, sits by the infirmary fire every evening now, humming tunelessly and telling riddles to anyone foolish enough to listen. You find yourself drawn there one night. Maybe it's the rain, maybe it's the quiet, maybe it's the need to be near someone who remembers a time before all this started cracking apart. She's chewing something, slow and thoughtfully when you approach. Probably a fennel root or a bone.
Yeah.
You know about the old well, she says, before you even speak. You blink. What well? She grins like a fox. Exactly. And then she leans in and tells you, long before the chapel was built, before the nunnery was even stone, this land was marked by a spring. The villagers said it belonged to a goddess, unnamed, faceless, wild. Women used to gather there at solstice, barefoot and singing to bless themselves. When the church claimed the land, the spring was sealed beneath the chapel floor, a holy site buried beneath another, like a secret tucked under a lie. They poured holy water over it, Perpetua says, but the earth remembers. It sounds ridiculous, except you've heard things too, about sisters who leave offerings beneath the altar, who hum old tunes with no words, who draw spirals in the frost on chapel windows. You never knew what to make of it. Harmless ritual, boredom, madness. Now you're not so sure. Here's your historical fact. Many medieval convents were built on or near former pagan sites, springs, groves, shrines. The church often co-opted these locations, rebranding them with saints and sacraments. But traces of the older beliefs persisted, especially among women, whose traditions were harder to police. Some convents banned solstice celebrations outright due to pagan overtones. And still, they happened. That night after prayers, you sneak back into the chapel. The rain taps gently at the stained glass windows like it's asking to be let in. You kneel by the altar, as you're supposed to, but then you shift to the far corner, where the stone floor dips slightly. You press your palm to it. Cold, damp, alive. You don't know why, but you whisper something. Not a prayer exactly, more a question without words. And for a moment, you swear you feel the faintest warmth beneath your hand like a heartbeat. You tell no one. But others start behaving strangely too. Novices caught with flowers tucked behind their ears. Sister Lucia found barefoot in the garden, muttering over a rosemary bush. During Lauds, someone swaps the incense for something earthy and sweet. Basil? Mugwort? The abbess notices, of course. Her lips thin to a line. The very next day, a new rule: no unsupervised time in the chapel. Incense must be blessed. All plants brought indoors must be pre-approved. Everyone nods. No one obeys. Here's your quirky fact. In a 13th century convent in Brittany, a series of mysterious symbols were found etched into the underside of the communion table. Circles, moons, and animal shapes. They were dismissed as doodles for centuries, until modern scholars recognized them as pre-Christian fertility sigils. It's now believed some of the nuns were quietly practicing old rites beneath the church's nose. You begin to wonder, is that what's happening now? It starts small. You see spirals traced into the dirt path outside the laundry, a line of feathers tucked into the window cracks. Someone, probably Sister Beatrix, starts painting strange stylized eyes onto the backs of old hymn boards. Protective eyes, watching eyes. Some sisters cross themselves in front of them, others pretend they're not there. During evening prayers, someone starts humming a note that doesn't belong in the chant. A low, vibrating tone that sits beneath the melody like a drum beat beneath a hymn. It's hypnotic. Some join in. Some look around, wide-eyed, unsure whether to be frightened or comforted. And then Sister Margarita collapses. She's in the middle of lecturing a novice about improperly folded veils when she goes rigid, eyes rolling up. She falls hard, arms seizing, voice choking on something that sounds like Latin, but isn't. You rush forward with the others, but she's already out cold. She wakes in the infirmary with no memory of the episode. Sister Helena whispers, she's been touched by spirits. Sister Julienne mutters, she's been drinking the sacramental wine again. The abbess says nothing. That night the bells ring wrong, off rhythm, off key. You feel it in your ribs like a warning. Tonight's scholarly debate. Were these pagan holdovers among nuns deliberate acts of rebellion or subconscious cultural memory? Some historians argue women in convents kept certain traditions alive because they were comforting, familiar. Others believe they were symbols of deeper resistance, hidden in plain sight. After all, if you weren't allowed to question the world, you found other ways to name it. You start wearing a sprig of lavender pinned inside your scapula. Not for rebellion, not for faith, just because it makes you feel connected to something older than obedience, older than the abbess, older than the church, and you're not the only one. You see symbols drawn in chalk beneath the bell tower, hear chants whispered behind the laundry. You catch Leanne once, drawing a spiral in the dust beside the well, then brushing it away before anyone sees. You pretend not to notice. That night you add something to the archive. There are ghosts in the water and old gods in the stone. We're not worshipping them. We're remembering them. That's not heresy. That's history. You go to sleep with the scent of lavender on your skin and the hum of invisible hymns in your ears. And in your dreams, the well is full again. The dreams don't stop. Not after the well, not after the humming. You try to dismiss them at first, Chalk it up to stale air and too many hours copying parchment by candlelight. But they start following you into daylight. It's in the way the shadows pool too long beneath the chapel arches, in the shiver you feel when you walk past the herb garden at dusk, in the taste of copper on your tongue whenever someone says penance. You're not the only one dreaming. Sister Lucia tells you one morning without making eye contact that she saw a woman made of fire walking through the dormitory. She didn't say anything, she whispers, eyes red. Just touched my forehead, and then I couldn't stop crying. Sister Julienne has been speaking in her sleep. Not prayers. Names. Names no one recognizes. You heard her last night, across the dormitory, murmuring something that sounded like Alia. Alia! Over and over. And then there's Leanne. She comes to you in the scriptorium, closes the door and places a folded letter in your hand. They're not just dreams, she says. They're memories. Maybe not ours, but someone's. The letter isn't addressed. It's not dated. But it's written in a hand that's both familiar and utterly strange. Curved, elegant, like ink flowed from the pen without ever lifting. I remember the garden before the altar was built. I remember the women in white robes. I remember singing without fear. I remember her hands covered in earth and blessing. And I remember the fire. You reread it 3 times. It doesn't make sense, and yet it makes perfect sense. There's something deep in the bones of this place, older than the church, older than the vows, older than even Sister Perpetua. You can feel it now. Like the floorboards remember footsteps from centuries ago. Like the air carries songs no one dares sing anymore. Here's your historical fact. Across Europe, some convents incorporated ancient customs into their rituals long after official doctrine forbade it. Candle ceremonies held on solstice nights, processions to local springs, even fertility rites disguised as blessings for future harvests. While the church labelled these activities as superstitions, or worse, heresy, they often remained embedded in practice through the women who passed them down. You think of the older sisters now, those who rarely speak, who carry herbs in their sleeves and draw stars on the corners of linen cloths. You thought they were strange. Now you wonder if they were simply remembering what no one else would. It's Sister Beatrix who says the quiet thing out loud. You're working in the scriptorium together, bent over a badly translated letter from some bishop who thinks he can command loyalty with a wax seal, when she mutters under her breath, "What if we were never supposed to be nuns?" You look up. She doesn't. "I mean it," she continues, ink pooling at the edge of her quill. "What if the whole idea of cloistering us was a mistake, a punishment disguised as holiness?" You say nothing, because you've thought the same thing. She turns to you, finally, her eyes bright. "We're not saints, we're survivors." It settles in your stomach like a stone, and then a seed. You start listening differently, watching more closely. One afternoon, while helping in the kitchen, you see Sister Helena carving something into the wooden spoon handle when she thinks no one is looking. You catch a glimpse, a spiral, flanked by twin crescents. You say nothing. She nods once subtly and continues stirring the lentils. A new symbol appears in the laundry hall a few days later, drawn in soap on the back of the door, 3 dots in a triangle. No one scrubs it off. Even the chapel isn't safe from it. Someone, brave or foolish, scratches a circle into the base of the lectern. It looks old, like it's always been there. The abbess notices during chapter and says nothing, just stares at it for a long time with her jaw clenched tight. And here's your quirky fact. In 14th century records from a convent in southern France, an abbess complained of restless sisters making patterns upon holy objects. She ordered a purge of all symbols not found in scripture. What followed was a mysterious fire that gutted the convent's west wing. No cause was ever found. Some of the sisters later claimed the fire was a warning from someone older than God. You wonder sometimes what the abbess dreams about. She looks tired lately. Her sermons are shorter, her discipline sharper. You've seen her flinch when passing the chapel. Her hands tremble slightly when holding the Eucharist. There's a hollowness in her now, as if some certainty she's clung to for years has started to rot from the inside. And then something strange happens. The scrolls stop. No accusations, no gossip, no anonymous letters slipped into aprons or altar cushions. Silence. At first, it feels like a blessing, a break in the tension, but after a few days the quiet becomes suspicious. You're sitting in the herb garden with Leanne when she says, "You know what happens right before a storm breaks?" You glance up at the sky. "Stillness?" She nods. "This feels like that." That night someone enters the chapel and lays something on the altar. It isn't a prayer. It's a small stone wrapped in linen, and inside the linen blood. Not much, just a smear, but it's fresh. By morning the linen is gone, the stone remains, no one speaks of it. Tonight's scholarly debate, whether the line between heresy and memory is thinner than the Church would like to admit. Some scholars suggest that the so-called pagan remnants in medieval convents weren't rebellious. They were ancestral, carried by women who never had the luxury of separating belief from survival. Others argue that such practices were acts of spiritual defiance, that by drawing a circle or lighting a candle on the wrong night, these women reclaimed something stolen. You lie awake that night staring at the ceiling. Outside the rain returns, slow, relentless. In your hand you hold the old letter again, the one about the garden, the fire, and you think, maybe we're not dreaming after all, and maybe we're remembering. It begins with a meow, soft, insistent. Not the sound of a stray cat begging for scraps at the convent gates. Those are common enough, but something closer, inside. You hear it first during matins just as the bells toll. A long, drawn-out yowl echoing off the stone walls of the chapel, so clear and sustained it halts the choir mid-hymn. For a heartbeat, no one moves. Then the abbess clears her throat, loudly, and prayer continues as if the air itself hadn't just bent sideways. But the cat cries return, more often, louder. No one sees it, not once, but everyone hears it. During meals, in the scriptorium, even in the garden. It becomes a joke among the younger novices. Sister Beatrix calls it St. Whiskers. Someone even draws tiny paw prints in the margins of a psalter. A laugh, a distraction, until it stops being funny. It starts with Sister Agnes. You find her one morning hunched over in the dormitory, clawing at her throat like something's lodged there. Her voice is shredded. She tries to speak, but what comes out is not language. It's a sharp yowl, a perfect feline shriek. And then she starts to crawl. The infirmary fills with the sound of whispered prayers and muffled sobs. Agnes is locked in the old storage room away from the others. The abbess claims she's feverish. Delirium, she says. She's fasting too harshly. But you saw her the day before, eating, laughing, braiding her veil with bits of mint from the garden. She was fine, until she wasn't. That's the thing about hysteria, it spreads. 2 days later, Sister Imelda begins twitching during prayers. Then comes the scratching, the growling, then a scream so loud it rattles the pews. One after another, it happens again. 6 sisters, all within the week. By the time the bishop is summoned, half the convent is afraid to sleep. Even the abbess starts showing cracks, deep furrows between her brows, fingers drumming too fast on the chapel lectern. You see her whispering to Sister Perpetua after compline, and for once the ancient nun does not look amused. Here's your historical fact. In the 15th century France, a convent of nuns was reported to have fallen under a mysterious affliction where multiple sisters began meowing like cats, sometimes for hours. The incident was so disruptive that soldiers were brought in to surround the building. The cause? Still debated. Some blamed demonic possession. Others pointed to mass hysteria triggered by stress, starvation, and isolation. The bishop arrives on a grey morning with a retinue of pale-faced clerics and a crucifix that looks like it was polished specifically for exorcisms. You and the rest of the sisters are summoned to the chapel. Agnes is dragged in, wrists bound with rosary beads, eyes wild. She's not meowing anymore. Now she laughs. Loud, sharp bursts of laughter that make the nave feel a little colder. The bishop begins the rites. You watch from the back, heart in your throat. It's brutal. Shouted Latin, sprinkled water, aggressive psalms. Agnes thrashes, bites. At one point she spits, and it lands on the bishop's cassock. He doesn't flinch, just keeps shouting. The rest of you chant along because not chanting is worse. By the end of the hour, Agnes is limp, quiet. Her eyes are still open. They call it a success. But that night, 3 more sisters fall ill. Here's your quirky fact. In some medieval convents, symptoms of possession, meowing, shrieking, convulsions, were seen not as punishment, but as signs of divine ecstasy. One German abbess wrote extensively about the blessed torments her sisters experienced. In her version, demons were less evil and more like dramatic dance partners in a mystical performance. Of course, not everyone buys that theory. Leanne comes to you, pale and furious, holding a scrap of parchment. On it, someone has drawn a spiral with cat's eyes in the centre, inked in red. They're trying to frighten us, she hisses, make us obedient again. Who? You ask, though you already know. She doesn't answer, just rips the paper in half. And here's where the scholarly debate sharpens. Was convent hysteria purely psychological, or a subtle rebellion wrapped in madness? Some scholars suggest these outbursts were the only way women could express distress in a system that offered no vocabulary for anger, trauma, or desire. Others dismiss it all as contagious delusion. But the timing is suspicious. The victims, always those who questioned, resisted, or remembered. You begin to notice who's not affected. The most devout sisters, the quiet ones, those who repeat the rules like incantations, those who never attended the midnight chapter, who never whispered about spirals or symbols or wells beneath the altar. You wonder if that's coincidence or immunity. Then one night, Sister Perpetua stops you in the corridor. She smells like lavender and dust. Not all madness is madness, she says. Some of it is memory dressed in noise. You blink, unsure what to say. She pats your arm. They'll try to scrape it out of us. The remembering. Don't let them. And just like that, she walks away. You carry her words like a second heart for the next several days. The chapel becomes quiet again, but not peaceful. It's the silence of tension pulled taut. You all pray more now, but not because you believe. You pray because someone is watching, because there's power in rhythm. Because even if the words mean nothing, the chanting means everything. It holds the walls up like it keeps the fear out. Maybe. And then the cat cries return. But this time, it's not from a sister. It's from the ceiling. You all freeze as the mewling echoes from the rafters above the altar. Sister Julienne looks up slowly. You all do. Nothing is there. Just the rafters and silence. But the crying continues. Long, low, unsettling. That night someone leaves a message on the altar, scratched into the wax of a half-melted candle. She's watching from the rafters. Let her speak. No one touches it, not even the abbess. And the next morning Sister Agnes is gone. The official word is that she was sent to a priory for healing, but no one saw her leave. No one said goodbye. And her rosary beads, still on her cot. It begins with ink. A single splotch, black as midnight and just as unsettling, blooms across the margin of a page in the abbess's own Bible. You're not there when it's discovered, but the whispers spread faster than wax in summer. Sister Helena says she saw the abbess drop the book like it burned her. Sister Julienne claims she caught a glimpse before it was whisked away. A circle of smudged ink, lines branching out from it like veins. A tree, a star, a map. You don't get to see it. No one does. But for the rest of the week, the abbess keeps her Bible locked in the vestry, and that's when the other marks begin to appear. Not graffiti, not this time. In the scriptorium, pages begin turning up. Strange. Not the usual gospel translations or saintly sermons, but texts no one recognizes. Lines that drift away from Latin into something softer, older, phrases that rhyme without reason, descriptions of women dancing in firelight, hands clasped, mouths open in wordless song. The first time you find one, it's just 2 lines tucked between psalms. She plucked the moon from the sky and hid it under her tongue. She spoke in silver and the wolves came willingly. You stare at it for nearly a full minute before realizing you're holding your breath. You look around, no one else seems to notice, or maybe they're pretending not to. You quietly tear the corner off the page and slip it into your sleeve. That's the beginning. More appear. Hidden in bindings, slipped into hymnals, scratched lightly into the wax seal on the drawer of the ink cabinet. None are signed. Some are nearly illegible, smudged by time or panic or damp hands. But the message is always the same. Something lives here beneath the silence. Here's your historical fact. In several medieval convents, surviving manuscripts contain marginalia, notes and illustrations added later, often by anonymous hands. While most were benign, flowers, jokes, animal doodles, a few were deeply subversive. Lines of poetry, questions about doctrine, cryptic prayers not found in any liturgy. Some scholars believe these were acts of quiet rebellion, small inked cracks in the wall of obedience. So you begin collecting the fragments. Not all at once, that would be suspicious, but slowly, methodically, like someone rebuilding a memory from ash. You hide them between layers of vellum in the oldest hymnals, in the hem of your cloak, under your mattress, beside the dried lavender. Leanne helps, so does Sister Beatrix, even Julienne, though she never admits it outright. You see her slip something into the archive one night after Vespers, and when you retrieve it later, it's a full page, written in her unmistakable slanted hand. They call it heresy because they're afraid we might remember who we were before we belonged to them. You press it to your chest like a second heartbeat, and yet the danger grows. The abbess begins inspecting the scriptorium twice daily. Pages are removed, scrolls vanish from their drawers, the ink cabinet is locked for the first time in decades. You're all given stricter assignments, less creative work, more copying, scripture only, no deviation. The punishment for deviation? Public penance. It starts with Sister Imelda. You see her kneeling in the center of the chapel during chapter, arms stretched out wide, a wooden board balanced across her shoulders. Her hands tremble from the weight. Her head is bowed. The abbess reads from the Rule of St. Benedict, her voice flat and cold as slate. Imelda's crime? Copying non-sanctioned verse. No one says who reported her, but the timing is convenient. You whisper a prayer under your breath. For mercy? No. For silence. Here's your quirky fact. In some monastic orders, writing was considered a sacred act, nearly equal to prayer. But deviation from holy texts was seen as dangerous. Several convents banned original composition outright, fearing that women might write from experience rather than revelation. One nun was exiled for composing a poem about childbirth, another for comparing Christ's love to the heat of the sun on bare skin. But still the writing continues. It moves to stranger places. On the back of a chapel pew, someone carves, "My skin is parchment. Write your truth upon me." A candle stub is found etched with the phrase, "Burn me to speak freely." One night, you wake with a start and find ink stains on your fingers. You have no memory of writing anything, but your nightdress smells faintly of parchment. You check your mattress. A new slip waits for you. We write because we are not allowed to speak. We write because they cannot unwrite us all. The archive swells. It's becoming too large to hide. So you do something you swore you wouldn't. You begin copying it. Not with ink, not with words, but with memory. You memorize the phrases, the symbols, the cadence of the stories. You teach them to Leanne in fragments. She teaches them to another. It becomes a whispered liturgy passed from sister to sister, hidden in idle conversation, in chants sung just a fraction too slowly. A secret gospel with no book, no priest, no absolution. Tonight's scholarly debate. Is the act of writing inherently rebellious when placed in the hands of the silenced? Some historians argue that for medieval nuns, Writing wasn't just expression, it was survival. Others say it was a form of spiritual possession, a way of channeling suppressed truth through divine means. But maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe writing is just what happens when the soul has nowhere else to go. You begin to wonder if the walls remember the ink, if the floor still tastes it, if the rafters echo with half-spoken psalms, rewritten in the mouths of girls who were never supposed to speak at all. You lie awake that night staring at the low-ceiling beams, your thumb rubbing the ink-stained edge of your blanket. There's a voice in your head now, not yours, not God's, but it whispers anyway. Write it down. They won't believe you later. The abbess declares a day of silence, not the usual regulated kind. No whispering during meals, no idle talk during chores, but an absolute, consecrated, full-day fast of the tongue. No speech, no singing, no confession, only breath and prayer and the soft shuffle of sandals on stone. To cleanse the spirit, she says, but everyone knows what it really is. A muzzle, a warning. She announces it during morning chapter, her voice slow and honeyed, like she's explaining a blessing instead of issuing a decree. The sisters nod, dutiful, heads bowed, but you see the flicker of tension under the surface, the small shifts of the jaw, the clenched fists folded too tightly in laps. And then she adds the final detail. At the end of the day, all sisters will present themselves for chastity inspection. The room doesn't gasp. This isn't a scandal in the church's eyes, but something inside you shrinks. You haven't heard those words since you were a novice, and yet the memory is immediate. Bare knees on cold stone, calloused fingers pressing into your hip bones, the smell of sweat and incense and sanctified shame. You feel Leanne stiffen beside you. The abbess continues. These measures are meant to ensure spiritual integrity. That phrase. You could scream. Instead, you don't speak, because now it's law. Here's your historical fact. During the height of monastic scrutiny in the 14th century, chastity inspections were real and terrifying. Church authorities, sometimes male bishops or appointed inquisitors, performed physical examinations on nuns suspected of breaking their vows. These tests were meant to verify virginity or uncover signs of pregnancy, but they were often based on superstition, guesswork, or punishment disguised as procedure. That morning breakfast is silent. Bowls scrape, spoons clink. Not a word passes between you and the sisters at your table, but the tension is louder than bells. You look around and count. 5 faces missing. Maybe ill, maybe hiding, maybe worse. You know better than to ask. After chores, everyone lines up. No talking, no eye contact. Just the endless sound of the abbess's sandals against the stone as she paces slowly down the hall. One by one, the sisters are called behind the curtain in the infirmary. Each time it feels like a minute too long, and when they return their eyes are lowered, faces pale, some shake. One has to be helped back to her cot. Leanne grips your sleeve as they call her name. She doesn't return for almost half an hour. You're next. You step behind the curtain and face Sister Margareta standing beside the abbess. There's a chair in the centre of the room, a bowl of holy water on the table, and a cloth you know is meant for modesty but feels more like denial. You remove your scapula, your veil, your belt. The ritual is old and sterile and deeply humiliating. They don't touch you in the cruelest ways, but it's cruel all the same. The questions come, written on parchment, yes or no only. Have you had dreams? Have you touched another? Has your body changed? You check the boxes they want, you keep your silence, and then you leave. Here's your quirky fact. Some convents implemented virginity belts. Tight, uncomfortable waist bindings meant to symbolize purity. Though mostly symbolic, some were actually locked and only opened for bathing or examination. A few have survived in museum collections adorned with inscriptions like, "Unguarded, I invite death." You return to the dormitory and find Leanne curled on her cot, her eyes dry but vacant. "Did they hurt you?" You mouth silently. She doesn't nod. She doesn't shake her head. She just stares. That night, no one sings during Vespers. The usual chant echoes flatly across the chapel, led by two novices who can't stop trembling. The abbess doesn't seem to notice, or maybe she enjoys the silence. The real storm comes after Compline. You're brushing your hair in the dark, your fingers still shaking, when a slip of parchment lands on your lap. No name, just one word. Enough. You look up. Half the dormitory is awake, eyes gleaming in candlelight, and without speaking, without even nodding, you understand what's about to happen. By midnight, a group of 7 sisters, Beatrix, Julienne, Leanne, and others you don't expect, gather in the laundry hall. You've returned to the hollow bricks. The archive is there, safely tucked away. But tonight, something more urgent simmers in the air. Beatrix speaks first, voice low but steady. She's trying to erase us. Sister Helena nods. She's always been trying. This is just the loudest she's ever shouted it. No more scrolls, Julienne adds. No more hiding. If we're going to fight back, it has to be all of us. And it has to be now. You look around. Some faces glow with fury, others tremble. But everyone's eyes are wide open. You speak without thinking. What about the rest? The ones who are afraid? Beatrix smiles sadly. They'll come, or they'll survive another way. But we're not waiting anymore. Tonight's scholarly debate. Were convent revolts acts of feminism before feminism had a name? Some historians think so. Documented cases of nuns resisting authority, locking out abbots, writing to kings, refusing inspections, suggest a kind of proto-resistance. Others argue these were isolated acts of desperation, not organized rebellion. But maybe that's the point. Rebellion doesn't have to be clean. It just has to start. The group disperses before dawn, nothing flashy, no grand declarations, but something's shifted. You feel it in the air. The weight of fear has cracked just a little. That morning during chapter, the abbess looks out at the room full of bowed heads, unaware, or pretending not to see, that they're no longer bowed in submission. They're waiting, preparing, remembering. You hum under your breath during the final prayer, not quite in tune, not quite off-key, just enough to be noticed. After the inspections, something in the convent's air goes sharp. The silence lingers, not as devotion but as pressure, a kind of psychic fog that hangs in the dormitories, thick in your throat, always a second away from cracking open into screams. The abbess walks with new purpose now, and not in a good way. There's too much satisfaction in the click of her heels, too much calm in her stillness. She's won, or at least she thinks she has. The sisters are quiet again. The scrolls have stopped. The archive remains hidden. But underground things don't die. They wait. It's Beatrix who makes the next move. She approaches you in the herb garden just after sunrise, hands dirty, veil pinned lopsided. She looks like she hasn't slept. We need medicine, she says, and I don't mean for headaches. She reaches into the folds of her habit and pulls out a small cloth pouch tied with red thread. Inside, dried herbs, ground so fine you could mistake it for tea. But it isn't. You know what it is before she even speaks the word. Pennyroyal. Your stomach turns. You found it? She nods. Lucia keeps some in the apothecary, hidden under the valerian. We think she knows. Maybe she's always known. You swallow hard. Pennyroyal, tansy, rue. They've always been whispered about, like dangerous secrets or spells you'd only use if you had no other choice. Abortifacients. The church doesn't even name them aloud, but women do. Women have always named them. Beatrix looks at you. We have to be careful. If anyone finds it, they'll say it's witchcraft. They'll say a lot of things, but some of the sisters, they need it. Here's your historical fact. Despite church condemnation, many medieval nuns had knowledge of herbal abortifacients, passed down through midwifery, oral tradition, or folk medicine. Recipes often involved combinations of pennyroyal, savin, juniper, or even heavy doses of wine steeped with herbs. While risky, and far from guaranteed, these methods were often the only option for women with no other power over their own bodies. You hold the pouch like it might bite. and then you hide it in the hem of your veil. That same afternoon, during garden duty, you see Sister Margarita kneeling near the yew trees, lips moving in a silent prayer. She doesn't see you watching. She doesn't see the way her shadow twists oddly on the grass, like something else is kneeling beside her. You blink, and it's gone. That night, you go to Lucia. The infirmary is dimly lit, walls thick with the smell of boiled linen and damp wood. Lucia stands at the shelf, organizing tinctures in silence. You step in and say nothing. She doesn't turn. You set the pouch down on the table. "I didn't take it," you say. "I know," she replies, then softly, "There are others who have." You nod. She finally turns to face you. Her eyes are heavy but kind. "Do you think we're sinners?" she asks. You want to say no. You want to say something profound. But all you can do is shake your head and reply, "I think we're survivors." She nods just once and leaves the pouch where it is. Here's your quirky fact. A few medieval medical manuscripts written by nuns include recipes for what were called moon teas, herbal infusions meant to bring on the menses. While many were mild remedies for irregular cycles, others had more direct effects. The margins of these texts sometimes include coded symbols, circles, spirals, moon phases, that scholars now believe were a kind of shared, secret language among women healers. After that, things begin to move quietly. Beatrix distributes more pouches, only to those who ask. No questions, no lectures, just a look, a nod, and the passing of something that might save a life, or a reputation, or a soul. Leanne begins sketching again. Not just saints, but women in cloaks holding leaves, women kneeling beside cauldrons, women braiding herbs into each other's hair. She hides them in the pages of unused psalters. One afternoon you find a drawing tucked into your pillow, a woman standing in firelight, hands open, eyes closed. Her mouth is full of stars. The sisters are speaking again, not with words but with looks, with glances passed over shared loaves of bread, with songs hummed just a bit off tempo. You begin to understand that rebellion doesn't need banners. Sometimes it's just survival, stretched quietly across enough hands to become something that feels like hope. Then comes the knock. 3 sharp raps on the door of the infirmary during evening prayers. When Lucia answers, 2 strangers stand there. Clergy, not from the bishop's house, but from farther away. You recognize the seal on their scrolls, the inquisitorial office. Everyone knows what that means. That night chapter is tense. The abbess reads nothing, just glares. The 2 inquisitors sit on either side of her, robes too clean, faces like marble. They say they're here for a visitation. Routine, nothing to fear. But their questions begin before dawn. Sister Helena is called first, then Julienne, then you. They sit across from you in the refectory, scrolls open, quills poised. Have you ever witnessed forbidden rituals? No? Has any sister spoken to you of impure desires? No. Are you aware of any unauthorized writing, recording, or journaling? You hesitate, just a second, too long. They look up, but you say, firmly, no. They nod, dismiss you. You're shaking when you leave, but you don't run. You walk slowly, because panic is a confession. Tonight's scholarly debate. Were medieval inquisitions about purity or about control? Some say these visitations were genuine attempts to maintain doctrine. Others argue they were exercises in fear, especially in female communities. Historians note that convents were targeted far more aggressively than monasteries. Why? Because a group of women living together, outside the direct control of men, was inherently threatening to the order of things. That night, a new message appears in the archive. No paper, no ink, just a stone, carved with a single line. They cannot see what we carry in silence. You don't know who left it, but you understand. The church can send inquisitors. It can test your body. It can lock your doors, but it cannot find the thing you've hidden in plain sight. Your knowledge, your medicine, your voice, You light a candle before bed and place it in the windowsill facing out toward the fields. Just one flickering light, a signal, a warning, a promise. They start in the cellar, the Inquisitors, that is. You hear it from Sister Beatrix, who hears it from one of the kitchen girls, who swears she saw the pair of them descending the stairs with lanterns and a scroll in hand, muttering about relic inventories. Officially, they're reviewing the holy storage, checking for counterfeit saints' bones, making sure no one's hiding an unauthorized scrap of the true cross in an old biscuit tin. But you know better. They're looking for something, or someone. The air changes with them here. The sisters speak in shorter sentences. Laughter dries up. Even the chapel songs are sung like confessions, stiff, subdued, like any misplaced note might be taken down as evidence. The Inquisitors are quiet, methodical. They ask questions that sound casual until they aren't. Where did you learn Latin? Have you ever been left unsupervised in the scriptorium? Who signs for the herbs in the infirmary? Every word you give them feels like gamble. You start hiding the archive in a new place every day, under the choir loft, behind loose bricks in the wall near the garden, once even in the rain barrel, wrapped in oilcloth and hope. You memorize the order of entries in case it's found and destroyed. You whisper the phrases in your head like prayers. Some nights, Leanne mouths them back to you from her cot. No one else can hear, but that's the point. Here's your historical fact. During the 15th century Inquisitions across Europe, investigators often targeted women's communities, particularly those known for independent income, political connections, or unregulated practices like healing. Many nuns were accused not of heresy, but of concealing knowledge, a crime punishable by removal, isolation, or, in rare cases, execution. The Inquisitors begin inspecting hands. Yes, hands. Sister Julienne returns from questioning with her palms red and raw. "They made me hold a crucifix for an hour," she whispers, "to see if it burned." You think she's joking, but she's not. The next day, Sister Lucia is seen soaking her fingers in vinegar. "For the ink stains," she mutters when someone asks. You follow suit that night, scrubbing your hands with lemon rind until your knuckles ache. The archive isn't safe anymore, not on the page, not on the skin. And then, one morning, the Inquisitors are gone. No announcement, no departure blessing, just vanished. The abbess resumes morning chapter with a new glint in her eye. "Order has been restored," she says. "Praise be. But you've seen enough to know that silence isn't safety. It's a stall. The damage is already done." Sister Imelda doesn't return from the infirmary. Sister Helena goes mute, refuses to speak even when addressed directly. And Sister Perpetua, who once seemed like she could outlive the building itself, collapses in the chapel aisle 2 days later during evening prayer. You're the one who catches her head before it strikes the floor. She smiles, barely. "That's one way to silence an old witch," she says. Then she closes her eyes. They bury her before dawn, and no chant, no procession. Just a hasty hole behind the vegetable patch, a slab of stone laid on top, unmarked. You visit it that night, fingers in the dirt, and whisper her name 3 times. You don't know if she hears, you don't know if she's gone, but you remember what she said. They'll try to scrape it out of us. You wake the next morning to blood in the wash basin. Someone's, maybe everyone's. A red film across the surface of the water, dark and quiet. You check your own arms, clean, your lips, unbitten. The other sisters do the same. No one speaks of it. But later that day, someone finds a scrap of linen on the altar. It's soaked through. Here's your quirky fact. In several early convents, menstruation was considered a mark of spiritual impurity. Nuns were not allowed to receive the Eucharist during their unclean days, and in some houses, they were forbidden to enter the chapel at all. But elsewhere, particularly in more remote or autonomous orders, menstruation was viewed differently, as a natural rhythm, sometimes even associated with divine femininity. Some convents kept coded calendars carved into stone or wood, tracking moon cycles alongside feast days. It clicks. The blood, the linen, the cycle. It's not a message of warning, it's a calendar, a signal. You pass the idea quietly to Leanne. She passes it to Beatrix. That week, during prayers, several sisters begin humming the same off-note in unison. Not discordant, just enough to mark the moment. It becomes your new language. Blood, chants, placement of candles. You create a schedule, invisible to anyone not paying attention. A rotation of movements and gestures layered beneath the routine. You start counting. How many nods between verses? How many steps between garden and chapel? There's a shape forming beneath the convent's skin, a pattern, a code. And then, the moment you feared since the inspections, someone finds the archive. You return to the chapel after dusk, and the hiding spot behind the wall has been broken open. The bricks are scattered. The linen wrappings are torn. The book is gone. Your legs nearly give out. You stagger into the shadows and sit with your back against the cold wall, bile rising in your throat. It's over. It's over. Every name, every phrase, gone. Or worse, exposed. You imagine the inquisitors returning. You imagine sisters lined up, blindfolded, hands bound. You imagine yourself with fire licking at your heels, and then you see it. Not the book. A single page, pinned to the inside of the hiding place with a shard of wood. You pull it free, hands shaking, and it reads, "You can burn the parchment." But not the memory. We live in each other now. No signature. But you know. The archive isn't gone. It's been scattered, memorized, copied, hidden in 30 small places across 30 stubborn minds. You're not alone. Tonight's scholarly debate. Were the women of medieval convents simply victims of circumstance? Or were they part of something more intentional? Some historians argue that despite oppression, these women formed complex social, emotional, and intellectual networks, what we might now call resistance cells. Others dismiss that idea, suggesting survival was just that. Survival, not revolution. But what if the line doesn't matter? What if survival was the revolution? That night you gather with Beatrix, Julian, and Leanne under cover of candlelight. No archive between you, just memory. You begin to speak, slowly, carefully. A line from a letter, a chant, a date, a name. They nod, they repeat it, and in the dark your voices begin to weave something larger than paper, something fire can't touch. By now the rebellion doesn't look like rebellion. It doesn't roar, doesn't storm through the halls or topple altars. It exhales, it whispers. It takes root in the rhythm of daily life, like a song you can't stop humming. No banners, no swords, just folded notes, silent nods, and a shared glance that carries more weight than a sermon. If the abbess knows, and she must, she hasn't said a word. But her silence has changed. It used to be regal, commanding. Now it's brittle, tight-lipped and twitching. The sort of silence that comes right before glass breaks. There's talk that she's fasting again. Voluntarily this time, as if God might speak more clearly to a hollow stomach. She doesn't lead chapter as often. When she does appear, her voice has a rasp to it, like she's been shouting where no one can hear. Her eyes dart more, linger on corners, on shadows, on you. That's when you start noticing the blood under her nails. Small flecks at first, barely visible, then darker smudges, more frequent, always scrubbed clean by the next day. You mention it to Leanne. She nods slowly, like she already knew. "She's flagellating," she whispers. "Probably in the old prayer cell. The punishment reserved for the desperate, the dying, the devout, or the guilty." You find the cell 2 days later. It's barely a room, tucked behind the vestry under a collapsed archway, smelling of mildew and bitter incense. On the stone floor, dried streaks, old stains. A wooden whip with knotted cords lies beside a folded cloth soaked through. There are teeth marks in the fabric, so the abbess is unravelling. You don't feel pity, not exactly. But there's something close to recognition, because you felt it too, how the silence can rot, how prayer can start to sound like begging, how your own voice can vanish under the weight of someone else's holiness. Which brings us to Sister Matilda. She's a mystic, or at least that's what the convent used to call her. Now, they just say she's unwell. She's the one who fasts for weeks and then declares that she's fed by angels, who lies in her cell staring at the ceiling for hours, lips moving in a private conversation with God, or perhaps herself. Most of the sisters avoid her, but you've been watching, and one night, you follow her. She slips out during Vespers, barefoot, carrying a bundle of dried rosemary and a beeswax candle. You trail behind, quiet as you can, past the refectory, through the cloister, and into the abandoned chapter house, the one damaged in last spring's storm and never repaired. Inside, Matilda lights the candle and begins to hum. Not a hymn, not Latin, a low circular melody, one note flowing into the next like water into water. You sit in the shadows and listen, and then she speaks, not to you, not even aloud, but the words shape themselves in her throat and you hear them all the same. Take my hunger, O Lord, bind it to your name, strip my body so you cannot strip my soul. She begins to sway, and suddenly you understand. This is her worship, not doctrine, not obedience, ritual. Matilda is starving herself not to die, but to exist, to control the only thing left to her, her own body, her own suffering. Here's your historical fact. Many medieval female mystics engaged in what scholars now call holy anorexia, fasting not as dietary control, but as a form of spiritual authority. By refusing food, some women claimed direct communion with God, circumventing priests entirely. Others used fasting as protest, rejecting the church's control over their flesh. Some were canonized, others were institutionalized, a few simply disappeared. Matilda continues her chant until the candle flickers out. She never sees you, or maybe she does and chooses to ignore it. Either way, you don't follow her again, but you start lighting candles in your own cell, silent, alone. You let the wax run over your hands, let the warmth sting your skin just enough to remember that it's yours. Others start doing it too, small acts of discipline, not the church's, your own, and here's your quirky fact. Some medieval nuns were known to wear belts lined with tiny thorns underneath their habits, voluntary penance devices meant to mortify the flesh and bring the soul closer to God. But in at least 2 known cases, women confess they wore them not for God, but to reclaim control over their bodies after assault. It's not suffering that makes you holy, it's the choice. That's what the church never understood. That night someone leaves a carved candle in the laundry room tucked into a folded habit. The wax has a spiral pressed into its side and the Latin phrase libertas per dolorem, freedom through pain. You take it, light it in the garden and leave it burning on the stone near Sister Perpetua's grave. You think she would have liked that. The next morning, Sister Julienne declares she's fasting. For clarity, she says. By week's end, 3 others have joined her. But this isn't a cult of suffering. It's a declaration, a message, that our bodies belong to us. Tonight's scholarly debate, were these acts of spiritual starvation rebellion or religious devotion? Scholars remain divided. Some believe mystics were empowered visionaries, women who used suffering as agency. Others argue they were deeply traumatized, channeling pain into religion because nothing else was permitted. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps it had to be both. You fast for one day, then another, not out of guilt, out of choice. You still eat, but you decide when and how and why. That night, you write in the dark, not in the archive, on your skin, a line from the chant you heard Matilda humming. My mouth is empty, so I speak with fire. You press your hand to the ink, and you do not pray for forgiveness, because you do not need it. You don't mean to become a leader. No one ever really does. Not in places like this. Not in a world where power is inherited or conferred by God, or granted at the end of a whip. But something strange starts happening after the fasting. Sisters begin looking to you, not with reverence, Not like they looked at the abbess when she still held command with her gaze alone, but with recognition, with quiet nods, with small offerings, a sprig of rue tucked into your veil, a folded page slipped under your bowl, a hand on your shoulder in the dark, no words, just presence. The archive may be scattered, the ink may have vanished, but the movement has not. It lives now in breath, in memory, in the low thrum of shared silence. What began as survival is growing teeth. The abbess feels it too. She calls a special chapter meeting without warning. Morning bells ring too soon, too loudly. You and the other sisters arrive half-dressed, veils pinned crooked, belts askew. She stands at the head of the room like a statue chipped by wind. Her voice when she speaks is as brittle as kindling. There has been a corruption, she says. No one blinks. Acts of rebellion, blasphemy, heresy. Stillness. Her hand trembles at her side. The Lord has withdrawn his favor. I have received visions, warnings. Of course she has. She scans the room like she's waiting for someone to speak, to confess, to weep and tear their robes and beg forgiveness. No one does. She announces new measures. All candles are to be blessed before lighting. All fasts must be declared in writing. No writing permitted outside of scriptural transcription. No private prayer without witness. She's choking the air. But we've learned to breathe differently. That afternoon, Leanne passes you a sliver of parchment. 3 words. It's almost time. Time for what, she doesn't say. But you feel it too. There's pressure in the walls now. A quiet flexing of stone. Like the building itself is watching, waiting. That night Matilda speaks. Not in riddles, not in chants, not to God, to all of you. After complying, she stands in the chapel aisle, barefoot and glowing, candle in one hand, the other raised, not in blessing, but in offering. I have seen the end, she says, her voice calm, whole. And it is not fire, it is return. The sisters don't move. She continues. There is something beneath us, older than these stones, older than the church. It has been listening, and now it waits for our answer. Julianne takes a step toward her, then another. Matilda kneels, and one by one, the others follow. You stand still, heart pounding, because this isn't rebellion anymore, it's awakening. Here's your historical fact. In several documented convents, most notably in parts of Italy and Spain, groups of nuns began to center their spirituality around visions and mysticism that had little to do with orthodox teachings. Some claimed to speak directly to divine feminine figures. Some experienced group ecstasies, spontaneous chants, or mass fainting spells. The church labeled these as demonic or hysterical. But in at least one case, the local community protected the nuns, believing them touched by heaven. You kneel last, not because you doubt, because you understand what this means. The chapel becomes a new kind of space after that. Not holy, not forbidden, alive. Sisters begin entering barefoot. Someone replaces the incense with dried lavender and crushed bay. The floor is swept clean every morning, but someone always redraws the spiral at the altar's base before Vespers. No one claims it, no one erases it. And then one morning the spiral changes. You find it while lighting the altar candles. A second ring has been added, drawn in chalk, faint and trembling. Inside it, a single word, in Latin, revertimini, return. Here's your quirky fact. In a few surviving letters from an unnamed 14th century nun in Flanders, she describes her dreams as letters from the stone. She claims the chapel spoke to her in sleep, offering symbols and riddles that matched no known scripture. One of the most repeated phrases was revertimini ad radices, return to the roots. So maybe this isn't new. Maybe you're just finally listening. That evening you gather with the others in the laundry room, the old meeting place. The tunnel has long since crumbled, but the memory remains. The sisters arrive quietly, no signals needed. They bring candles, bundles of herbs, scraps of parchment tucked into their sleeves. Leanne places a bowl of water in the centre. Beatrix adds a lock of hair wrapped in thread. Julienne, a page from the archive. You bring your voice, it's time. You kneel, and the room follows. Matilda begins the chant. Not a hymn, not Latin, something older. No one remembers learning it, but everyone knows the words. We remember the fire, we remember the well, we remember the stone and the hands that held it. We are the daughters of silence, and we are no longer quiet. The words settle into the walls like ash. The abbess doesn't appear at chapter the next day, or the day after. Her cell is locked, the window shuttered. You wonder if she's inside, praying, starving, or watching you through the cracks. Tonight's scholarly debate. Were these collective rituals acts of hysteria, healing, or something in between? Some scholars dismiss them as mass psychogenic illness. Others believe they were the only outlet for repressed spiritual agency. But a growing movement suggests these rituals were intentional, not errors of the mind, but expressions of wisdom passed through bodies, through rhythm, through choice. A kind of embodied theology the church never dared to name. In the laundry room that night, the bowl of water ripples without being touched. Someone gasps, but no one runs, no one speaks. You're learning not to fear what cannot be explained, because maybe the divine doesn't need explanation. Just witness, just memory, just return. It's always the bells. They ring in the morning, marking the Angelus. They ring for meals. They ring for death, though that last one happens less often now, or at least less officially. But this time, they don't ring for any of that. They ring at midnight. 3 tolls, long, too long, wrong. They wake you from a shallow sleep that already felt more like listening than dreaming. You sit up before you know why, and across the dormitory other cots are rustling. No one speaks. No one has to. Every sister who hears those bells knows what they mean. Not prayer, not penance. Summons! You dress in silence, fingers trembling slightly as you wrap your belt. In the dimness, Leanne meets your eyes. She's already lacing her boots. Beatrix appears at the door, pale as wax, and nods once. You follow. Out through the cloisters, past the courtyard, into the chapel, where the air is so thick it's like breathing through cloth. The candlelight flickers strangely tonight. Taller flames, moving as if disturbed by something invisible passing just beyond the edge of sight. And there, at the front of the chapel, lies the abbess. Not dead, but close. She's kneeling, barefoot, veil removed, her once pristine robes soaked with sweat and something darker. Around her, the altar is stripped bare. The reliquary box is overturned. The brass cross lies crooked, face down, as if ashamed. The abbess raises her head, her eyes are sunken, wild. "I have seen it," she says. No one breathes. She stands slowly, like the bones inside her have forgotten how to hold her weight. I have tried to silence it, to discipline it, to burn it out. She looks around the room at each of you. But it will not go. It was here before me. It will be here after. She opens her palm. Inside it, a spiral, carved deep into the flesh. Not ink, not paint. Blood. Real, raw. Unmistakable. "I thought I could command it," she says, voice almost gentle. "But I was wrong." Then she laughs. Not cruelly, not madly, almost sweetly. "I fought it. You welcomed it. And it came to you." She steps down from the altar and kneels before you. Here's your historical fact. Records exist of several abbesses throughout medieval Europe who, after long tenures of control and discipline, experienced late-life mystic conversions. Some claimed visions, others entered trances fasting for weeks. A few renounced their positions altogether, choosing to live as lay sisters or even solitary anchorites. Church officials often explain these shifts as divine penance, but the nuns around them sometimes called it something else. Liberation. No one moves. Then Matilda steps forward, places her hand on the abbess's head, and whispers something none of you can hear. The abbess weeps. No one else does. There is no joy in a queen's collapse, only the shifting of weight from one generation to another. That night, the doors to the vestry are unlocked. The books once restricted are opened. The scrolls once burned are spoken aloud again. Not all of them make sense. Some are little more than fragments. Poetry without grammar. But that's how memory works. You read them anyway. You read them like scripture. And here's your quirky fact. In one surviving convent near modern-day Belgium, nuns created a mirror scripture, a handwritten book composed entirely of reversed Latin phrases and mirrored images. Historians first dismissed it as gibberish, but recent analysis shows it follows a structured rhythm and contains recurring themes: birth, water, binding, loosening, and return. The last page ends in large red letters. Et non erat Deus, said Soror, and it was not God, but sister. After the bells, things begin to change, not loudly, but deeply. The chapel altar is no longer a place of fear. It becomes a gathering point, a meeting space for chants and whispered stories. The spiral remains, redrawn each dawn with water or flower petals or, once, salt. The abbess now sits at the edge, watching quietly, her palms always open, like she's learning to receive rather than command. Julienne takes over managing the herb garden. Leanne begins teaching the novices to write, not Latin alone, but symbols, songs, histories. She teaches them to write their own names first, not the saint names forced on them when they arrived. You watch one girl, barely 15, trace her birth name across the parchment and stare at it like she's never seen herself before. You begin rebuilding the archive, not in a drawer, in minds, in bodies. Each sister memorizes a passage, a line, a story. You meet weekly to speak them aloud, not to record them, but to remember them, so that if this place burns again, and it might, the words will survive, etched in the marrow of 30 women who are no longer afraid of being seen. And tonight's scholarly debate. Does memory have more power than manuscript? Scholars argue that oral traditions within convents often ran parallel to written law. Quiet, unsanctioned histories passed from woman to woman. Some say these oral records were more accurate, less distorted by male clerical hands. Others argue they were too fluid to be trusted. But you've lived it now. You know, sometimes what's written in the flesh lasts longer than what's bound in vellum. One evening you return to the old well. You didn't expect to, but something pulls you there. The floor of the chapel is cool under your feet. You press your palm to the stone above the spring and feel warmth, movement. You whisper a line from the archive. We do not pray to be forgiven. We pray to remember, and something shifts beneath you. Not ominous, just present, just waiting. You lie there, face against the stone, eyes closed, and you feel her. Not a ghost, not a goddess, not a vision, just her. The first woman. The one who danced here before the walls rose. The one who taught the first girl to sing. The one who laid her hand over the well and said, "This is mine." And you whisper, "It's ours now." After the night of the bells, life in the convent becomes something no outsider would recognize. From the outside, everything looks the same. Daily prayers, candlelit vespers, the occasional sound of hymnals drifting over the cloisters like holy smoke. But underneath, it's different. Looser. Fuller. You don't realize how tight everything was until it begins to breathe again. You don't kneel because you have to. You kneel because you choose to. There's no need for passwords now. The spiral is everywhere, not always drawn, but implied. You see it in the way the sisters wrap their belts, the way they braid their hair. You see it in the way Leanne touches your hand and doesn't immediately pull back, like maybe the rules about skin and sin were someone else's invention all along. The abbess, still pale and quiet, remains present, watching, listening. Her former sharpness dulled into something more human. She walks barefoot now, and some of the younger novices giggle at her chipped toenails and stubborn bunions. Once you catch her helping Julienne lift a bundle of dried rosemary into the apothecary cupboard, and for a moment she looks like any other woman. Tired, yes, but not terrifying. And then one evening she speaks to you directly. You're walking the perimeter of the garden at dusk, counting the petals on a row of calendula flowers, an old habit for clearing your thoughts, when she steps from the path behind the refectory and falls into step beside you. She doesn't speak for a long time. Finally she says, "I had a sister before I came here." You say nothing, letting her fill the silence. She ran away from the monastery school, married a mason's son. The family disowned her, said she'd ruined the bloodline. I thought they were right. She looks at you then, eyes rimmed red. Now I wonder if she saved herself. Here's your historical fact. It wasn't uncommon for noble families to send their spare daughters to convents, especially those seen as too rebellious, too outspoken, or, God forbid, unmarriageable. For some, it was a death sentence in silken scripture. For others, it became the only space where they could develop intellect, language, or mysticism beyond domestic walls. But for many, it was neither prison nor sanctuary. It was simply where they were placed, and from there they made what they could. The abbess doesn't wait for a reply. She reaches into her pocket and hands you a folded piece of parchment. "If anything happens," she says, "this must be hidden where no one can find it." You unfold it later. It's a confession, not of sin, but of knowledge. Descriptions of rituals long forbidden, names of herbs, chants, star alignments, a list of what the church would call offences. She's written them all down in her own hand and signed it. For the memory of what we were before they made us holy. She's still the abbess, but she's not in charge anymore, and that's when the letters begin. Not from bishops, not from Rome, from other convents. They arrive quietly, folded in bundles of dried sage or tucked into bread deliveries. Letters without signatures, written in slanted hands or unfamiliar dialects. But the messages are clear. It's happening here too. We saw the spiral on our chapel door. Tell us how you began. We are remembering. Here's your quirky fact. Across Europe, there is evidence of nuns' clandestine correspondence networks, hidden letters, messages passed between convents, even chains of copied prayers carried by travelling merchants or sympathetic monks. These sister circles often focused on shared dreams, herbal recipes, and descriptions of visions unapproved by church authority. Though few originals survive, some fragments were later discovered sewn into the hems of habits or tucked into reliquary boxes. You and Beatrix begin compiling the letters. Leanne begins translating them. Some are written in a version of Latin that drips like poetry, some in languages you've never studied but somehow feel like you understand. You read a letter from a convent on the coast of Wales that describes the sea, pulling at our hearts like a mother not ready to let go. Another from Austria, where the sisters reportedly buried a reliquary and danced around the site by moonlight to remind the bones what joy felt like. You write back, carefully. You offer fragments, never names, never locations. But you share the spiral. You share the chant. You write, "We never meant to become anything. We just remembered too much to keep quiet. And so the web grows. Not conspiracy. Not a revolt. Just women remembering they're allowed to want something more. The younger novices are different now. They arrive from cities and villages with quiet expectations. But within a week they're painting spirals onto stones and slipping herbs under their pillows. They learn faster, ask louder. One girl, no older than 14, draws a crescent moon onto the corner of every page she copies. You see her and say nothing, just nod. Tonight's scholarly debate. Did these slow uprisings form a unified movement, or were they isolated flare-ups of spiritual independence? Traditional historians argue that there was no organization, just scattered bursts of disobedience. But others argue the opposite, that these sisterhoods formed a net, woven in silence, passed through letters, rooted in shared experience. A movement too soft for official recognition, too flexible to be crushed, too quiet to be canonized. And still it grows. One night you gather all the sisters in the chapel. There's no feast day, No holy reason. Just the moon, bright and full through the upper windows. You bring out the reliquary box, the one that once held the saint's knuckle wrapped in gold. It's empty now. You place it at the altar's centre. Julienne fills it with rosemary. Leanne adds her sketch of a woman with stars in her hair. Matilda places a strip of linen stained with ink and blood. One by one, the others follow. Scraps of parchment, a lock of hair, a shard of mirror, a single stone with a spiral carved into it, and finally, you add the abbess's confession. You close the box, and you seal it. Not to bury, to protect. This is your gospel. No saints, no martyrs, no miracles, just memory. You light a circle of candles around the box, and the chant begins, low, steady, older than scripture. She is not gone. She is not coming. She is already here. The wind changes before the messengers arrive. It comes in the form of a cold gust, sharp and sudden, sweeping through the cloisters just after morning prayer, tearing a veil from a novice's head and sending it spiraling into the garden like a bird trying to escape. You chase it, laughing, not the carefree kind, but the nervous kind, the kind that knows something is wrong before the reason arrives. You catch the veil and look up. The sky has gone that particular shade of grey that only ever means news. By evening they're here. 2 men on horseback, church riders draped in the red and black of the diocesan order. They don't speak to the gatekeeper beyond what's required, but the seal on the scroll they hand over is unmistakable. Not the bishop this time, the cardinal. The scroll is delivered to the abbess. She takes it into her cell, locks the door, and the next morning she's gone. No note, no belongings taken, just vanished. Her bed is untouched, her candle burned down to the wick. Her shoes remain at the foot of the cot like she meant to return. Some of the sisters believe she fled, some believe she was taken. A few believe she never left at all, that her body is gone but her spirit still walks the chapel, barefoot, watching. But you think she knew the timing better than anyone. She left to make space, and now the church has noticed the space. Here's your historical fact. Late in the 15th century, as the Catholic Church's control tightened in response to growing murmurs of reform, many convents came under direct inspection. Reformation visitations were launched, ostensibly to reassert discipline, but in truth to crush movements that had grown too autonomous. Several convents were shut down, some were absorbed by stricter monastic orders, others simply vanished from the records. The scroll announces a visitation. You read the message aloud in chapter, since no one else volunteers. There is no room for interpretation. This convent is to be evaluated for orthodoxy, purity of practice, and alignment with the will of the Holy Church. The archivist, spiritual leaders, and any self-proclaimed visionaries are to be presented for inquiry. It's addressed to the abbess. You fold the scroll carefully. Then they'll be disappointed, Beatrix says. We don't have an abbess anymore, Leanne adds, voice dry. You all sit in silence for a beat, then burst into quiet laughter. The sound is strange in the chapter room, like a song no one planned to sing. The laughter doesn't last. The next few days are a blur of planning, packing, hiding. Not for escape, no, you've gone too far for that. But for preservation. The relic box, the one now holding your gospel, is moved. You and Julienne bury it under the floorboards of the laundry room, sealed in wax wrapped in salt and rosemary. You draw the spiral on the underside of the plank. You kiss it before you close it. This isn't for you anymore, it's for whoever finds it next. Here's your quirky fact. There are at least 4 known cases in which hidden manuscripts were discovered in convent walls during renovations, long after the buildings were abandoned or repurposed. One was found inside a wine barrel sealed with beeswax. Another was stitched into the lining of a choir robe. Texts, not official doctrine, personal reflections, poems, medical instructions, and in one case, a full translation of a banned gospel written entirely in coded script. You begin practicing how to forget, because that's part of survival too. You rehearse your innocent face in the mirror, mouth neutral, eyes wide, hands folded like you've never held anything but rosaries. You burn scraps of parchment that might be too dangerous to explain. You scrub the ink from your nails until your fingers crack. You teach the novices how to lie without sounding like it. But still, the others prepare differently. Sister Mathilde carves a spiral into the chapel stone behind the altar, deep, raw, too large to erase. Beatrix plants rue in the herb garden and shapes the rose into a sigil only visible from the bell tower. Julienne writes a hymn, new melody, old rhythm, and teaches it to the younger girls under the guise of practicing Latin pronunciation. You walk through the cloisters one night, and every shadow feels full of memory, full of meaning, like the air is holding its breath. You pass by Sister Lucia in the infirmary. She's preparing bundles of lavender and nettle, not for medicine, but for smoke. If they take us, she says softly, we won't go without scent. That night someone paints words above the chapel door in egg white, barely visible in daylight, but glowing faintly in candlelight. In the beginning was not the word, but the wound. You don't know who did it, but you know why. Tonight's scholarly debate. When religious structures collapse, what survives? Doctrine, power, paper, or memory encoded in bodies, songs, rituals, and whispers? Scholars argue that the things most sacred to marginalized people often survive outside the lines. Unwritten, unrecognized, but persistent. Like the way some chants still echo in places with no name. Like the way you carry your history in your throat, even when your mouth stays shut. You sleep with your habit folded by the door. You don't know when they'll come, but they will. The night before the visitation, a storm rolls in. Thunder that shakes the rafters, lightning that etches your dreams in jagged white light. You don't sleep much. You sit with the others in the laundry room. No ceremony this time, no ritual, just closeness. Hands linked, candles lit. A single page passed around, each of you reading the line you were entrusted with. One last time. You don't say goodbye. That would make it sound like it's over. Instead you say, we remember. We remain. We return. They arrive at dawn. No bell this time. No warning. Just the steady grind of carriage wheels over gravel, the creak of leather reins, the clink of armor where it has no right to be in a house of peace. You're in the chapel when the doors open, wide, unapologetic, and a man steps inside like he owns the air you're breathing. He's not a priest, not a bishop. You recognize the silver clasp on his mantle, emissary of the inquisitorial office. Behind him, two others enter, one carrying a scroll case, the other wearing a face that looks like it's been trained to never register emotion. Blank, like marble, like death if it had paperwork. The emissary speaks without preamble. You will assemble the sisters. He says it like a formality, but the way he stands makes it clear this is not optional. You do as you're told, not because you're afraid, but because you are ready. They gather you in the chapter room. No one kneels. You sit upright, silent, hands visible, faces blank, but not empty. The novices sit in the back, eyes wide, posture perfect. Julienne sits beside you, her thumb quietly tracing a spiral into the hem of her habit. The emissary reads the charges: deviation from canon law, unauthorized liturgical practices, harboring mystical heresies, failure to comply with doctrinal order. One by one, like stones dropping into a well. He asks for the archivist. You raise your hand. He stares at you. You're the one who maintains this convent's written record. I am. Where is the archive? I no longer keep one, you reply. That much at least is true. He turns to the next name on the list. Sister Mathilde. She steps forward without fear, doesn't even blink. You've been reported for false prophecy and unorthodox ritual. Do you deny it? I deny nothing, she says softly. The air tightens. Somewhere behind you, someone shifts. Nervous. The emissary notices. He lifts his hand. This house is now under temporary interdict. Until such time as the church completes its inquiry, all sacraments are suspended. All correspondences are to be halted. Any materials deemed heretical will be confiscated and burned. He pauses. and any sister found to have knowingly participated in unauthorized rites will be escorted to the Holy Tribunal in Florence for examination. That last word, examination, lands with weight. You feel it settle into your chest like dust. Here's your historical fact. Examination under inquisitorial law could mean anything from intense questioning to physical inspection, and often involved isolation, deprivation, or worse. Nuns accused of heresy were sometimes stripped of their vows, imprisoned in male-run monasteries, or relocated indefinitely. A few were tried formally, most simply disappeared. You don't flinch. The emissary steps forward again. We will begin inspection at once. The search lasts 2 days. They ransack the dormitories, pull up floorboards, empty drawers. One of them even tastes the ink from the scriptorium well, claiming it may be mixed with hallucinogens. They confiscate a jar of rue from the infirmary and declare it spiritually suspicious. They cut open hymnals, searching for hidden messages between the bindings. They find nothing. Because everything you are now lives within, in voices, in memory, in bodies that refuse to forget. Still, fear simmers beneath the surface. You feel it in your gut. You watch it in the way Leanne touches her lips before she speaks, like she's checking for leaks. Julienne has stopped humming. Beatrix has started sleeping with her boots on. You all know it's not over. But then something happens. The emissary calls evening prayers. Formality, he says. A test. You gather in the chapel, lined like obedient sheep. A junior priest, too nervous to meet anyone's eyes, begins the standard Vespers chant. He fumbles the Latin, his voice cracks, and then Matilda stands and sings. Her voice is low, warm, steady. She sings the real chant, not the one written in church missals, but the one passed from your mouths to hers, from the archive to the air. The sisters join her, not a protest, a remembering. It's too beautiful to silence, too calm to punish, too old to deny. They can't name it because it has no name. They don't stop you, they just listen. And when it ends, the emissary clears his throat and says, "That will be all." That night, the stars are so clear you could draw constellations with your breath. Here's your quirky fact. In one 15th century convent ledger, a visitor recorded being present for an evening service, unlike any known rhythm, where the sisters sang in a haunting call and response that did not match the Roman liturgy. He called it an echo of the womb, not the word, and recommended further investigation. The convent was closed the following year. By the end of the 3rd day, the emissary leaves. No arrests, no trials, no burnings. Just a scroll nailed to the chapel door that reads, "The convent of Santa Eda is to be placed under indefinite observation, pending further review. No sacrament shall be performed without written approval of the diocesan office. No new novices shall be accepted. No letters shall be sent or received without examination." The hammering of that notice echoes louder than any bell. Indefinite observation, which is the church's way of saying, we don't know what to do with you, so they'll watch and wait and hope you'll forget yourselves. But you won't. You gather again in the laundry room that night. Fewer candles this time, no ceremony, just presence, just breath. You light a single flame and you speak one by one. I remember the names. I remember the chants. I remember the pain. I remember the hunger. I remember the story. And when it's your turn, you say, I remember everything. Tonight's scholarly debate. When systems can't destroy an idea, do they try to contain it, or simply wait for it to die out? Historians have traced dozens of forgotten movements that lived just long enough to leave echoes. Stories half told, songs half heard, margins scribbled with names no longer spoken. But every now and then, the idea survives. Not as a blaze, as a spark, carried forward by just enough people to keep it alive until the next breath of air finds it. You know what they think, that you're too quiet now to be dangerous, that they've won. But under your tongue rests a spiral, and behind your eyes, the fire,